Massacre Blade Sect leader Sangdal stood as the only one among the 6 martial masters recognized for unwavering loyalty to the Blade Lord. Yet beneath that loyalty lay a concealed truth, his ingratitude and a long-hidden ambition to surpass the very master he served. He tracked down the dragon turtle as it fled, immediately sensing that the creature was already on the verge of death. For decades, he had suppressed his desires, but the overwhelming power displayed by demon god Chun Yo-won stirred something deeper within him, intensifying his envy and greed. Deep beneath the frozen ground, he discovered the dragon turtle struggling desperately to move, its life slipping away. Recognizing its weakened state, Sangdal struck without hesitation, ending its life with only a few decisive attacks. When questioned about the core, he dismissed the concern with calculated reasoning, noting that retrieving it safely would be difficult while the North Sea Ice Palace, Orthodox faction, the demonic cult, and the demon god himself were present. As uncertainty lingered regarding the dragon blood and the core, Sangdal's lips curled into a grin, asserting that it would be far better for him to consume the power than allow it to fall into the hands of others. In that moment, the ambition he had buried for years surfaced completely. After absorbing the dragon turtle's core, Sangdal felt an intense chill spreading through his body as he steadied himself. His gaze soon shifted toward Yo-won, recognizing the demon god's presence as perfect timing to test the overwhelming power he had just obtained. Within, a low satisfaction spread as he reveled in his decision. He acknowledged that his internal energy had grown far beyond its previous limits, and the true lightning element chi now surging through his central dantian possessed destructive force capable of obliterating everything in sight. Yet a trace of disappointment followed, as he realized he had only managed to absorb a fraction of the essence core. He understood clearly that taking in more would have resulted in his own death by burning. Before his thoughts could settle, a black flame sword formed in Yo-won's hand and shot toward his neck. Startled, Sangdal instinctively raised his hand. To his astonishment, sparks burst forth, forming a lightning sword chi that intercepted the attack. As he realized he had successfully blocked the black flame sword, his eyes widened, filling with unmistakable joy. Yo-won observed Sangdal closely, recognizing the formless blade of lightning chi in his grasp. Even now, he could sense the lingering spirit of the dragon turtle within him, making it clear that the essence core had not been fully absorbed. Despite that, the power Sangdal displayed was immense, and Yo-won assessed that its effectiveness might surpass that of the Fire Kirin simply because the creature had only just died. Sangdal burst into laughter, his confidence swelling as he declared that the situation now favored him entirely. Moving like a flash of lightning, Sangdal circled Yo-won in an instant. He asserted that in a duel between equal martial masters, speed alone determined victory. In the next moment, he appeared behind Yo-won and unleashed the Berserk Saber Divine martial arts. Yet Yo-won responded immediately, stepping back and mirroring the same technique. Sangdal's eyes widened in shock as he witnessed both the speed and the unmistakable familiarity of the sword art. When their blades clashed, lightning and black flames intertwined, producing a violent, thunderous impact that shook the surroundings. A surge of disbelief rose within Sangdal as he questioned how Yo-won was capable of using the techniques of his sect, and with flawless execution. At the culmination of their exchange, the force of the collision pushed Yo-won backward until he came to a halt. Realizing the limitation of his current approach, Yo-won concluded that he needed a different method. Among the Berserk Saber Divine martial arts and the Heavenly Demon Sword art, only 2 techniques allowed dual wielding. One would create an excessive shockwave, leaving him no choice but to use the other. Advancing once more, Yo-won formed a black flame sword in one hand and a black ice sword in the other. As he moved, the techniques of both blades merged seamlessly, unfolding the sword force of the Heavenly Demon alongside the Berserk Saber Divine martial arts in perfect harmony. Sangdal's grin widened with delight as he acknowledged the display, recognizing the execution of 2 distinct techniques at once. Yet, as he observed more carefully, he discerned the flaw within the dual-wielding approach. Then, in a precise counter, he struck, shattering the interconnected sword techniques in a single decisive motion. Using the momentum of the clash, Yo-won swiftly withdrew. A frown formed on Yo-won's face as Sangdal broke through his combined assault. Seeing this, Sangdal reacted with casual confidence, remarking that although the simultaneous use of 2 sword techniques had initially surprised him, understanding them made them easy to counter. Within, Yo-won analyzed the situation, concluding that Sang-dal must have learned from the former Supreme Heavenly Demon. However, without the proper circulation technique, mastering the Heavenly Demon's sword art was impossible. It became clear to him that Sang-dal had focused solely on learning how to counter it. Sang-dal erupted into mocking laughter, asserting that Yo-won stood no chance now that all his techniques had been understood and countered. He added that the cave would soon collapse, preventing the use of the Heavenly Flash, and expressed absolute confidence that even if it were used, his newfound strength would allow him to endure it. Sang-dal surged forward, declaring with absolute certainty that this would be the demon god's grave. As he moved, lightning chi erupted from him, and he unleashed the Berserk Saber divine martial arts with overwhelming force. Yo-won rejected his claim, asserting that Sang-dal's belief in countering all his techniques was a grave mistake. At that instant, Yo-won dismissed the Black Ice Sword and executed a strange technique with the Black Flame Sword. His body split into 24 after images, each one moving like a real entity, all performing the same technique in perfect unison. Sang-dal shouted in confusion and disbelief, unable to comprehend the purpose of such an attack, convinced that even this would not be beyond his ability to counter. In the next moment, the divided figures converged into a single existence, and all their swords united at one precise point. A chilling, ominous force erupted from the condensed technique. Alarmed, Sang-dal swung his formless lightning blade in desperation, but it struck nothing but empty air. A jolt of realization ran through him as Yo-won vanished completely from his sight. Within, unease spread as he questioned whether he had fallen behind in speed and struggled to locate his opponent. Before he could react, Yo-won appeared behind him like a shadow. Sang-dal turned sharply, raising his defense in time to block what he believed was the incoming strike. Confidence surged within him as he convinced himself that he had stopped the attack and that, as before, he only needed to counter the Heavenly Demon sword art. But that belief shattered instantly. Yo-won had already passed him. A sharp pain tore through Sang-dal's left shoulder as the first strike landed. In the next instant, an overwhelming barrage followed. Countless sword strikes crashing into his body in rapid succession. His movements, driven only by the instinct to evade, failed completely as he was struck again and again without respite. Pain and fear surged within him as confusion took hold. He had been certain he blocked the attack, yet what he experienced defied that certainty. Deep within, realization dawned that such movement was only possible through the Berserk Saber divine martial arts. The truth struck him with force. Yo-won had fused the Berserk Saber divine martial arts with the Heavenly Demon sword art into a single unified technique. Yo-won noted calmly that Sang-dal's injuries were regenerating faster than those of someone who had consumed the Kirin's essence core, then decided to test it further. In the next moment, his sword moved in an unexpected trajectory. The blade severed Sang-dal's right arm, the very arm wielding the lightning sword Chi, and the stench of burning flesh filled the air. A scream of agony erupted from Sang-dal as the severed limb fell. A grin spread across Yo-won's face as he declared that he had finally taken half of what was owed. Without pause, he swung his sword again towards Sang-dal's neck, intent on claiming the remainder. In response, bolts of lightning exploded outward from Sang-dal's body. The sudden surge forced Yo-won to halt his advance and retreat several steps. Sang-dal clutched his blood-soaked shoulder, coughing up blood as his body trembled. Within, he reflected on the regenerative power granted by the Essence Core, recognizing its effectiveness, while also realizing it could not restore a severed limb. Doubt began to creep in as he compared Yo-won's strength to that of the Blade Lord. He analyzed what he had witnessed, the impossible movement that could only be achieved through the Berserk Saber divine martial arts, a discipline requiring one to transcend the natural limits of joints and muscles. To combine that with the Heavenly Demon's sword art, without even a known proper cultivation method, meant the creation of an entirely new martial technique. Unease deepened as he questioned whether the demon god before him was truly the same figure described in the records. Everything they had prepared so carefully was collapsing. A desperate need to escape took hold, driven by the urgency to inform the Blade Master. Yet even bringing down the cave would not grant him a chance to flee faster than Yo-won, and his body could not withstand absorbing the remaining essence core. Frustration mounted as the situation closed in on him. Then suddenly a realization struck. As he looked down, he noticed the lightning chi reacting intensely to blood. Recalling the earlier moment when his throat had nearly been severed, he recognized that the sudden discharge of lightning had briefly halted Yo-won's movement, likely due to the effect of electrocution. A grin slowly formed across his face as he saw an opportunity. Within, he resolved to draw Yo-Won closer, determined to use his own blood as a conduit to unleash a powerful surge of lightning and electrocute him with everything he had. Yo-Won, who had been standing still, began to move once more and stepped directly onto the blood. Sangdal's eyes gleamed as anticipation surged through him. With a sharp crackle, he released the trap he had been waiting for. A violent surge of lightning erupted instantly, raging outward with overwhelming force. He declared with certainty that the demon god would burn to death under his lightning chi. The current spread rapidly through the water, filling the entire cave with blinding sparks. The intensity of the light was so great that even Sangdal himself could no longer see what was happening. Convinced of his success, satisfaction spread across him. A triumphant smile followed as he believed the battle had ended, certain that Yo-Won had been reduced to ash within the thunderous chi. But his laughter abruptly collapsed into a choke. Yo-Won's hand had already seized his throat and demanded coldly who had truly killed whom. Yo-Won ordered Sangdal to return what he had stolen. Confusion flickered across Sangdal's mind, but before he could grasp the meaning, the heavenly demon energy invaded his body. The dragon's core within him was seized and drawn out. A violent crackle echoed as agony tore through him. His strength began to drain rapidly, slipping away beyond his control. Desperation filled him as he struggled helplessly, pleading for it to stop. Yo-Won observed the process with clarity, recognizing that the heavenly demon chi possessed a unique ability to absorb true chi of different elements. He confirmed that the lightning chi Sangdal had taken now belonged entirely to him and prepared to test its power. Releasing the accumulated energy, Yo-Won unleashed a devastating surge of lightning. The force struck Sangdal instantly, electricity bursting violently from his mouth and eyes. In the next moment, his head exploded under the overwhelming pressure, scattering across the frozen surroundings and staining the ice crimson. Yo-Won noted calmly that the result had been effective, deciding to retrieve the essence core and leave immediately. With urgency settling in, he moved toward the dragon turtle's shell. The core within continued to radiate powerful lightning chi, glowing brilliantly from inside. As he assessed its size, he realized it was larger than expected and would require significant time to fully absorb. At that moment, the ceiling above cracked and water began seeping through the fractures. Recognizing the danger, Yo-Won concluded that the intensity of the battle had destabilized the structure. Without hesitation, he decided to leave before the entire cave collapsed. He directed NANO to secure the essence core onto him. NANO confirmed that it was possible. In response, dozens of wires extended from the suit, expanding and surrounding the core until it was completely secured. A deep rumble followed, and the ice walls gave way, collapsing as torrents of water surged violently into the cave. Yo-Won quickly leapt down from the dragon turtle's shell and dashed toward the exit, urgency driving his every movement. He recognized that the cave was collapsing exactly as NANO had warned, leaving him no choice but to escape immediately. But the water that flooded into the cave surged with overwhelming force. A violent splash followed as Yo-Won was swept away almost instantly, his body dragged helplessly by the current. NANO triggered an emergency response, activating the suit's function while indicating that only half of the oxygen supply remained. Yo-Won attempted to steady himself within the torrent, but the force of the current made it impossible. His entire body was carried uncontrollably, unable to regain balance as the rushing water pulled him deeper. Amid the chaos, his body was dragged further as if being swallowed into an abyss. Within, urgency tightened as he realized the danger. The current was far too strong, pulling him toward the hole formed in the cave. Understanding the difficulty of escaping in such conditions, he ordered NANO to activate the boosters at full power. NANO complied, pushing the suit to its limits while reporting that the oxygen supply had dropped further. Propelled at tremendous speed, Yo-Won continued to be carried along the raging current. He was not alone. The corpses scattered throughout the cave were also swept into the torrent, along with loose weapons that spun violently in the water. These objects struck against him unpredictably, adding to the chaos. Frustration rose as he realized he could not evade both the debris and the current at the same time. Within, he made a swift decision to break through the ceiling instead. He noted that the destructive force of his ice swords had weakened due to the velocity of the flowing water, but it remained his only option. Gathering his true energy, Yo-Won redirected collected the floating weapons and hurled them upward, smashing them against the ceiling. The impact was not enough. Recognizing the urgency, he prepared to strike again. Nano issued a warning that using true chi would accelerate oxygen consumption, noting that the remaining supply had dropped dangerously low. Yo-Won ignored the warning. He continued striking the ceiling relentlessly, again and again, pushing forward despite the rapidly diminishing oxygen. Nano's alerts echoed as the oxygen level plummeted to nearly nothing. His body weakened as the suffocating pressure of the water and lack of air overtook him. At last, the ceiling broke, but the collapse came with it. Massive rocks fell, crashing down and burying Yo-Won beneath their weight as he was dragged deeper into the abyss. Nano's urgent warnings continued, signaling critical instability in his condition, his pulse faltering, his breathing dropping below safe levels. The crushing impact pinned him beneath the debris, yet it was not the end. Nano initiated an emergency process, beginning to replenish oxygen, and a sudden surge of force chi erupted outward. Cracks spread across the rock that trapped him, bubbles forming as the pressure built. In the next instant, the rock shattered apart, and Yo-Won forced his way free. Emerging from the debris, he questioned what had just occurred, having believed that his oxygen supply had been completely exhausted. Nano informed him that oxygen was being extracted directly from the surrounding environment, restoring a portion of his supply. Surprised, Yo-Won questioned why this had not been revealed earlier. Accepting the situation, he decided to replenish as much oxygen as possible before escaping. Nano clarified that the remaining oxygen in the surroundings was insufficient for further replenishment. Yo-Won acknowledged the situation calmly, realizing that nothing had changed. Escaping would still be difficult, especially with debris continuing to surge through the collapsing cave. Even the use of ice swords would not be enough under these conditions. Then, something caught his attention. A distinct and intensely cold energy emanated from a nearby staff. It was unfamiliar. None of the enemies he had encountered carried such a weapon. The surface of the staff was covered in engraved text, prompting Yo-Won to have Nano zoom in and scan the characters. Nano projected the scanned data into his vision. Cold ice heavenly art. At that sight, Yo-Won's eyes trembled. Recognition struck immediately. The cold ice heavenly art was a technique known only to practitioners of cold chi, passed down exclusively through the Palace King of the North Sea Ice Palace. This staff was no ordinary object. It was a relic long lost to the Northern Sea Ice Palace. The history surfaced clearly. Long ago, the dragon turtle had appeared, posing an overwhelming threat to the Northern Sea Ice Palace. The 5th generation palace master had confronted the creature, risking his life in battle. Despite his strength, he had been unable to defeat it. Faced with inevitable destruction, he made a final extreme decision to protect his people. He lured the dragon turtle into the palace's secret storage. That place had been constructed entirely from adularia, a material that grew stronger with increasing cold chi while continuously emitting it. Once sealed inside, even a martial master would struggle to escape. Within that environment, the ice walls became nearly indestructible. The palace master sacrificed himself, using the cold ice heavenly art to ensure the dragon turtle remained imprisoned. His decision came at a devastating cost: the complete loss of the Northern Sea Ice Palace's ancestral plaques, their martial arts, and their divine relic. Understanding the technique before him, Yo-Won analyzed its potential. The cold ice heavenly art was divided into 5 levels. By reaching the 3rd level, one could imbue rock with cold chi, transforming it into adularia. At the 4th level, even steel could be infused and converted into ice steel. At its peak, the final level allowed the creation of ice as durable as ice steel itself. A realization formed. If such a level of control was possible, he would be able to manipulate ice swords with a strength far beyond his current limitations, strong enough to break through the cave walls that had resisted him until now. Nano confirmed that all techniques of the cold ice heavenly art could be directly transferred into his brain and asked for permission to proceed. A grin spread across Yo-Won's face. Without hesitation, he ordered Nano to transfer everything, ensuring that not a single detail would be left out. Above the collapsing cave, hundreds of warriors from the Northern Sea Ice Palace and the Orthodox Alliance stood surrounded by the forces of the demonic cult. Jigal Sohi addressed Moyong Kong, her voice carrying concern. Moyong Kong expressed regret over how the situation had unfolded, while Youngi questioned Don Juchin about his internal injuries. Don Juchin reassured them that his condition, though painful, remained bearable. Their exchange was abruptly cut off. Great Guardian Markim intervened, ordering everyone not to resist and to remain still, assuring them that no harm would come if they complied. At that moment, Hobum emerged from the tunnel along with others, carrying the former lord on his back. Markim immediately questioned their return, noting the absence of the demon lord. Hobum explained that the underground cave had been on the verge of collapse, and Yo-Won had sent them out ahead. Given his mastery of Qinggong, Yo-Won should have reached the surface even faster than them. A realization struck Markim as his gaze fell upon the figure being carried. He recognized the person as the former supreme heavenly demon. Before he could continue, the ground beneath them cracked violently. The earth trembled as if struck by a massive earthquake, and the surface began to cave in. Reacting instantly, Markim issued urgent orders to release the paralysis on the warriors of the Murim Alliance and the Northern Sea Ice Palace. He commanded everyone to move north of the palace, toward higher ground. The orders were acknowledged without hesitation. Markim then instructed Hobum to protect the former lord at all costs, a command Hobum accepted firmly. Panic spread as screams erupted across the area. Warriors shouted warnings as the ground continued collapsing beneath their feet. The ice shattered and the earth gave way. Water burst forth from below, surging upward and flooding the entire area. The warriors scrambled to escape, retreating quickly to avoid being consumed. Amid the chaos, Hobum dropped to his knees, despair overwhelming him as he realized Yo-Won had yet to emerge. Nearby, Munku reacted with alarm, attempting to rush forward, but Wang Hul restrained her, preventing her from acting recklessly. Not far away, Mo Young-Kang watched the unfolding disaster. A grin formed across his face as satisfaction rose within him. He believed that the leader of the demonic cult had failed to escape. With that assumption, he concluded that the essence core of the dragon turtle was now lost as well. In his mind, even the demon god had proven powerless before the overwhelming force of nature. Jigal Sohee watched the scene unfold, unable to accept that the demonic cult leader had failed to emerge. Though, as the general strategist of the Murim Alliance, she believed she should feel relief, but an unease settled deep within her. She recognized that their survival had only been possible because the demonic cult leader had slain both the dragon turtle and the martial masters of the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect. She had convinced herself that her actions were justified for the sake of the Orthodox Murim Alliance, yet doubt now surfaced as she questioned what truly defined righteousness within the Orthodox path. Nearby, Dan Juchen silently observed his surroundings. His gaze moved across the guardians of the palace master, the elders, and finally Danbake, who was approaching with them. Elder Seol Ambake suddenly raised his voice, issuing an order to capture Dan Juchen and his group as traitors. He commanded that their Dantians be sealed and that they be imprisoned. At once, the palace guardians surrounded Dan Juchen and his subordinates from all directions. Youngi reacted with fury, rejecting the accusation and condemning the elders for breaking the palace's rules and supporting an unqualified young leader, which had led to the current disaster. Ambake responded harshly, accusing them of bringing outsiders into internal affairs and driving the palace master to his death, questioning their audacity to speak in defense. Within, Dan Juchen's thoughts hardened. He reflected on Danbake, once someone he had not wished to hate due to their bond as nephew and disciple, but that restraint had now vanished. In his eyes, Danbake had become the root of everything that had gone wrong, and he regretted that his brother had ever named him as the young leader. Danbake noticed the shift in Dan Juchen's expression. Rage surged through Dan Juchen as his chi flared outward. He challenged the legitimacy of Danbake's claim, questioning whether the people of the palace would truly support someone who resorted to such means despite lacking the qualifications. He declared that it was time to restore order within the Ice Palace. Ambake faltered at the sudden rise in power, taken aback by Dan Juchen's intent. Within, Ambake recognized the danger. Despite his injuries, Dan Juchen's chi remained formidable. Though he had appeared to submit earlier due to the presence of the demonic cult leader, he was still a martial master, one capable of standing against all the elders and guardians alone. With a cold grin, Dan Juchen made it clear that they had not surrendered out of fear of the demonic cult. He questioned whether anyone truly believed they would submit now, especially under the assumption that the demonic cult leader was dead. At that very moment, the ground trembled again. Shock rippled through everyone as they questioned whether another collapse was imminent. Dan Juchen's confidence wavered. He sensed something different, chi rising from beneath the ground, approaching rapidly. Then, a brilliant surge of energy burst upward, illuminating the entire area. From within that eruption, Yo-Won shot out of the ground. He rose above the frozen cold chi like a shadow, his presence dominating the space. Around him, shards of ice manifested into countless swords, all aimed toward the enemies gathered there. Relief swept through the demonic cult warriors as they witnessed their lord alive. Danbake turned toward Dan Jushin with a mocking expression, clearly contrasting his earlier confidence. Within, frustration tightened around Dan Jushin's thoughts. He could not comprehend how Yo-Won had survived such destruction, questioning whether he was even human. His attention then shifted to the object in Yo-Won's hand, the staff. Recognition stirred as he wondered if it could truly be the Cold Ice Staff, a relic long believed to be lost and never recovered. Long ago, a star had fallen to the north of Yunyan. Dan Young, the founder of the Northern Sea Ice Palace and a master of ice arts, attempted to forge armor from that meteorite. However, the material could not be smelted on its own, forcing him to combine it with gold. From that process, the Cold Ice Staff was created. Rather than being used as a weapon, the staff was revered as a divine relic. It was placed within the underground tomb that housed the ancestral plaques, accompanied by a legend stating that the one who obtained the Cold Ice Staff and awakened its hidden power would be the true and rightful palace master. Within, Dan Jushin connected the truth. Though damaged, the staff resembled the divine relic held by the founder's statue. He realized that the dragon turtle's return had been triggered by his brother, the late palace master, who had broken the seal of the ice walls in an attempt to recover that very relic. Unable to remain silent, Dan Jushin called out to Yo-Won, urgently seeking to speak with him. Danbake observed this with confusion, unable to understand his uncle's actions. It made no sense to him that Dan Jushin would approach the demonic cult leader without fear, especially after everything that had happened. He believed there was no possibility that Yo-Won would spare anyone who had sought the dragon turtle's essence core, but Yo-Won paid no attention. He moved past them, heading directly toward his own people. Within, Danbake accepted the situation, reasoning that it was natural for Yo-Won to return to the demonic cult. At the same time, relief settled in him. Had Yo-Won died, everything would have been lost. In his mind, Dan Jushin still remained the strongest martial artist of the Northern Sea. Sial Ambake, witnessing Yo-Won's return, quickly issued orders once more, urging the guards to act immediately and capture their targets. The palace guards responded at once, moving in to subdue Dan Jushin and his group. Dan Jushin resisted fiercely. The moment the guards attempted to seize him, he struck back, sending them flying away with a powerful burst of force. Ambake demanded to know whether he still intended to resist. Dan Jushin answered with equal defiance, making it clear that he would not be restrained and that they would pay for their actions. Within, his thoughts remained focused. This was an internal matter of the Ice Palace, separate from the issue of the Essence Core. He resolved that he had to prevent Yo-Won from interfering. Everything could still be settled, if only the demon god stayed out of it. With that determination, Dan Jushin moved swiftly, dashing toward Yo-Won. Seeing this, Ambake turned to Danbake and urged pursuit, realizing that Dan Jushin was after the divine relic. But within Dan Jushin's mind, only one goal remained. He had to obtain the Cold Ice Staff. If Danbake claimed it first, he would lose all justification and standing. Meanwhile, Yo-Won returned from the disaster and was immediately surrounded by his cult members. Relief and emotion surged among them as they welcomed him back. Munku, overwhelmed, expressed her distress, unable to hide how close she had felt to losing him. Others echoed her concern, urging him not to take such risks again. Yo-Won responded with a quiet, restrained reaction, letting out a faint, bitter laugh as he listened to their words. Amid the moment, Markham's attention remained fixed elsewhere. He focused on the staff Yo-Won carried, recognizing that while the Dragon Turtle's essence core was undeniably powerful, the cold chi emanating from the staff was equally extraordinary. Even though Yo-Won was already suppressing its presence, Yo-Won identified the object in his hand as the long-lost divine relic of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. At his words, Sanghwa reacted with sudden realization, while Wang Hul connected it to the relic the late palace master had desperately searched for before his death. Munku then questioned whether Yo-Won intended to return it to the young palace master. Yo-Won began to answer, stating that he had intended to do so, but his explanation was cut short. Footsteps approached rapidly. Dan Jushin arrived before them, only to be stopped instantly as Markim and the Six Swords stepped forward, blocking his path. They warned him not to advance further and instructed him to wait until Yo-won permitted it. Dan Juchin did not resist. Within, his resolve hardened as he accepted that everything he had done was for the future of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Even his pride was something he was now willing to discard. In the next moment, he dropped to his knees. With sincerity, he requested the chance to speak. Markham glanced back at Yo-won, awaiting his decision. Yo-won stepped forward and asked plainly what Dan Juchin wished to discuss. In response, Dan Juchin lowered his head completely, striking it against the ground in a deep bow. He admitted his wrongdoing, acknowledging that his attempt to seize the essence core had been driven by his desire to increase his chi. He recognized that Yo-won, as the one who had slain the dragon turtle, had every reason to be displeased. Despite knowing that an apology alone was insufficient, he still pleaded for forgiveness. He declared that he would relinquish any claim to the essence core and the dragon turtle's remains. Furthermore, he offered even greater concessions, whether it meant isolating the Northern Sea Ice Palace from Janghu or aligning with the demonic cult instead of the Murim Alliance. He was willing to accept it. All he asked in return were two conditions. Hobum reacted sharply, questioning the sudden attempt at negotiation. Murmurs spread among the cult members. The implications were immense. Closing the palace would mean halting all external activities and abandoning regional dominance. It was clear that Dan Juchin had cast aside his pride for a singular purpose. Even so, many recognized that regardless of his intentions, the fate of the Northern Sea Ice Palace was already in Yo-won's hands. Yo-won found the proposal intriguing and asked what Dan Juchin desired. Dan Juchin first requested that Yo-won refrain from interfering in the internal conflicts of the Northern Sea Ice Palace, emphasizing that their internal matters should remain their own. Yo-won then asked for the second condition. Dan Juchin revealed it. The staff Yo-won held was the palace's divine relic, and he requested that it be returned to him. At that exact moment, a desperate cry rang out from behind. Dan Baek and Elder Seol Ambaek rushed forward, their urgency breaking the tension in the air. Dan Baek urgently pleaded with Yo-won, insisting that the staff must not be handed over. He attempted to reveal what Dan Juchin had said earlier, claiming that with Yo-won presumed dead in the underground cave, the demonic cult would no longer be feared. Before he could finish, Dan Juchin lunged forward in fury, attempting to silence him. Markham intervened instantly. Despite reacting a fraction later, he blocked Dan Juchin with effortless precision. Even as Dan Juchin exerted himself fully, he could not hide his shock at the overwhelming difference in movement. Markham then instructed Dan Baek to continue. Dan Baek revealed that Dan Juchin had openly claimed he feared no member of the demonic cult in Yo-won's absence. Dan Juchin immediately denied the accusation, insisting his words had been twisted. He clarified that he had only meant he did not fear them if they were not under Yo-won's protection. At the same time, he condemned Dan Baek, declaring him unfit to become palace master and accusing him of attempting to resolve internal conflicts by relying on an outsider. Dan Baek retaliated without hesitation, turning the accusation back on him. He exposed that Dan Juchin had involved the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect, an act that ultimately led to the death of his father, the former palace master. The conflict escalated rapidly. Both sides gathered behind their respective leaders, and the Northern Sea Ice Palace split into two clear factions. Amid the rising tension, Dan Juchin once again appealed to Yo-won, urging him to accept the earlier offer. He promised anything in exchange for non-interference and the return of the divine relic. Dan Baek countered immediately, reminding Yo-won that he had already formed an alliance with the demonic cult through a contract signed in Kaifeng. Dan Juchin rejected this outright, questioning Dan Baek's authority to make such an agreement when he was not even the rightful representative of the palace. The noise grew overwhelming. As their argument intensified, Yo-won watched in silence, his patience thinning. Within, Dan Juchin believed events were unfolding as planned. Though irritated, he was confident that with so many witnesses present, Yo-won would be unable to act freely. Even if Yo-won chose to kill him, it would only turn public sentiment against Dan Baek. His aim was clear, to prolong the conflict and prevent Yo-won from intervening. Dan Juchin pressed further, challenging Dan Baek by questioning whether the people of the palace would ever acknowledge him if he continued to rely on external forces. Dan Baek responded sharply, pointing out the contradiction contradiction. If that were true, then why was Dan Juchin himself seeking the divine relic from Yowon? He revealed the underlying reason, the founder's decree. At this, Yowon sought clarification. Danbake explained that the founder of the Northern Sea Ice Palace had left behind a will stating that whoever obtained the divine relic would be recognized as the true palace master. Seizing the moment, Dan Juchin urged Yowon once more to make a wise decision, promising the full support of the palace if the relic was given to him. Danbake countered again, warning Yowon not to trust those words. Then, Yowon smiled. He repeated the decree aloud, that the one who obtained the divine relic would become the true master of the Northern Sea Ice Palace, and pointed out that the relic now rested in his own hand. Silence fell instantly. Both Dan Juchin and Danbake stood frozen, stunned into speechlessness by his declaration. The elders reacted with the same stunned disbelief. Some wondered if he intended to keep the divine relic for himself. Yet, unlike them, the expressions of the six swords remained unchanged. They understood Yowon well enough to know he never spoke without purpose, and they grasped exactly what he intended. He was claiming the Northern Sea Ice Palace itself. Dan Juchin stepped forward, his tone sharpening as he warned that Yowon had crossed a line. He insisted that the divine relic belonged solely to the palace and was entirely separate from the matter of the dragon turtle. Danbake followed, expressing appreciation for Yowon's help, but pointing out that anyone would pursue the relic if obtaining it meant becoming the palace master. Yowon responded calmly, repeating their own words, that the one who earned the divine relic was the true master of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Dan Juchin argued that the decree was meant only for the bloodline of the founder, not for outsiders. Danbake supported that claim. Yowon found the argument curious, noting that he had never seen any condition excluding outsiders. Without further explanation, he placed the golden staff onto the ground and waved his hand. His internal energy surged outward, carving into the solid surface with a sharp, piercing force. Words were engraved into the ground itself. The passage declared that the one who obtained the cold ice staff and its hidden power had the right to become the true master of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. Yowon questioned whether this was not the exact decree written beneath the founder's statue. Within, Danbake was shaken, realizing they had only glanced over it briefly, while Yowon had memorized it perfectly. Yowon continued, pointing out that obtaining the relic had not been an easy feat. He questioned why none of the previous palace masters had been able to find it if it were so simple. Elder Ambake observed the shifting situation carefully. Danbake held the legitimacy of lineage but lacked the strength to support it. Dan Juchin, on the other hand, possessed overwhelming power but had committed acts of treason involving external forces, awakening the dragon turtle, and causing the death of the former palace master. The atmosphere among the warriors began to change. Though Yowon's claim initially sounded unreasonable, the reality could not be ignored. He had slain the dragon turtle and saved the people of the palace. Moreover, he had recovered the divine relic that would have otherwise remained lost beneath the depths. Quietly, Dan Juchin sent a message to Danbake, confronting him about the consequences of his actions. Danbake responded coldly, rejecting the accusation. Dan Juchin dismissed the argument, focusing on the greater issue. If they failed to resolve the situation, the entire palace would fall under the control of the demonic cult, something neither of them desired. With a darkened expression, Danbake acknowledged this truth. Seizing the moment, Dan Juchin reminded him of something crucial, the secret tied to their lineage. Then he voiced it aloud that the divine relic did not simply belong to anyone, it chose its owner. He questioned what the true qualification might be, suggesting that it lay within the blood of the Dan family. He affirmed this belief, concluding that no matter how powerful Yowon was, the divine relic would never choose him. That, in his view, was the key to turning the situation. All the while, Yowon remained silent. With NANO's assistance, he listened to every word of their exchange without missing a single detail. Dan Juchin raised his voice, declaring that the divine relic of the Northern Sea Ice Palace possessed the will to choose its rightful owner, as it contained the souls of their ancestors. Yowon responded with visible irritation, dismissing the claim without concern. Danbake reinforced the argument, asserting that without being chosen by the relic, no one could be considered its true owner. Yowon countered immediately, questioning whether either of them could prove such a claim. Sensing that Yo-Won had accepted their premise, Dan Juchin seized the moment, confidently stating that since the relic was created by their founder, they naturally possessed the ability to prove it. Without hesitation, Yo-Won planted the golden staff firmly into the ground and allowed them the opportunity to demonstrate it. Dan Baek was momentarily stunned by how easily the chance had been given, while within, Dan Juchin felt certain that Yo-Won's confidence stemmed from ignorance. Believing he would soon regret this decision, Dan Juchin gestured toward the staff, signaling Dan Baek to step forward. Within, Dan Baek bristled, realizing he was being sent first because he was seen as unworthy. Determined to shatter that assumption, he approached the staff with resolve. He paused before it, focusing intently, then reached out. The moment his hand touched the staff, everything changed. An intense, overwhelming cold surged instantly through his arm. His hand froze solid in an instant, and pain tore through him as the freezing spread. Shock rippled through the onlookers. Elder Seol Baek shouted urgently, instructing him to use the ice-white divine arts and endure the cold if he wished to be acknowledged by the relic. Dan Baek activated the technique. His hair turned silver as he pushed his limits, attempting to withstand the freezing force. But it was not enough. A powerful rebound struck him, throwing his body backward as if repelled. The elders and guards rushed toward him in alarm. His arm had been completely frozen, leaving him unable to move. Confusion spread among them as they realized the implication: he had not been chosen. Amid the chaos, Dan Juchin stepped forward with a faint smile. Through a telepathic message, he revealed the truth to Dan Baek. While bloodline was a requirement, it was not sufficient on its own. To claim the relic, one needed overwhelming chi and cold chi, power strong enough to suppress the relic itself. Without reaching that level, attempting to take it would only result in failure. Dan Baek, unable to move, was left with nothing but frustration. Ignoring him, Dan Juchin turned to Yo-Won with composed politeness and requested permission to prove himself. Yo-Won allowed it. Within, anticipation surged through Dan Juchin. He believed that this moment would secure everything. If the relic acknowledged him, neither the elders nor the Guardian Pavilion would be able to oppose him any longer. A powerful surge of cold spread outward as Dan Juchin unleashed the ice-white divine arts at its 8th mastery. The force of his chi carried the momentum to freeze everything it touched. Stepping forward, he grasped the golden staff and attempted to lift it. The moment he made contact, resistance struck him. Shock filled his expression as the cold chi surged into his hand with overwhelming force, causing intense pain despite him pushing his technique to its absolute limit. Within, disbelief tightened around his thoughts. Even at maximum output, he could not suppress the energy. Worse still, he felt the staff rejecting him outright, and he could not understand why. The elders watched in stunned silence. They urged him to withdraw, but Dan Juchin refused. Driven by desperation, he poured even more cold chi into the attempt, forcing himself to endure as he tried to claim the relic. It was futile. The rejection only intensified. At last, his hands froze over completely, forcing him to release the staff. Despair took hold as he stepped back, unable to accept what had just happened. Without hesitation, Yo-Won extended his hand. The staff responded instantly, pulling itself into his grasp. He then stated calmly that they should now understand why he could not hand it over. From the distance, Moyong Kang and Jagal Sohee, who had gathered to observe the situation between the demonic cult and the Ice Palace, were left stunned. Moyong Kang recognized the gravity of what had occurred. Not only had Yo-Won obtained the Dragon Turtle's essence core, but he had also claimed the divine relic, an outcome far worse than anything they had anticipated. Nearby, realization struck Dan Baek. Within, he understood the truth. This had never been about bloodline alone. Yo-Won had allowed them to try, fully aware that they would fail. By doing so, he had proven his claim in front of everyone in the palace. At that moment, Yo-Won sent a telepathic message to Dan Juchin, who now stood in helpless silence, thanking him for creating such a favorable situation. Frustration and despair overwhelmed Dan Juchin as he shouted for death instead, refusing to acknowledge Yo-Won as the palace master no matter what. His followers echoed his defiance, declaring their loyalty to him. Yo-Won responded calmly, questioning whether they would believe him if he showed them proof. As he spoke, the divine relic in his hand began to shine. A brilliant light radiated outward, and everyone present was left astonished by the overwhelming display. More than a month had passed since the lord of the demonic cult took control of the Northern Sea Ice Palace. The original palace, devastated by the collapse and flooding, had been reduced to ruins beneath the water. The survivors relocated eastward and began rebuilding from the ground up. From above, the elders of the Northern Sea Ice Palace and Danbake observed the reconstruction. Workers moved tirelessly, restoring what had been lost. The progress was steady, though large gaps still remained. The water had been completely cleared, an achievement made possible by Yowon. Freezing a breach of that scale in a single moment had been beyond anything they could have imagined. Danbake found himself increasingly awed the more he reflected on it. He questioned whether he could ever reach such a level, recognizing that even without belonging to the Ice Palace's bloodline, Yowon had accomplished what none of them could. Elder Ambake acknowledged that Yowon was far beyond ordinary comprehension, yet expressed relief that everything had ultimately worked out because of him. Danbake agreed, admitting that he had misunderstood Yowon until he came to realize his true intentions. The memory remained vivid. Yowon had created ice swords as durable as cold steel, then unleashed cold chi alongside the heavenly flash, freezing the massive water-filled collapse in an instant. Witnessing that overwhelming display, the entire Northern Sea Ice Palace had bowed in unison, acknowledging him as the true heir to the divine relic. At first, Danbake had believed everything had been taken from him, worse than if Dan Juchin had seized power. But that belief had changed. Yowon had declared that he would take Danbake as his disciple and personally teach him the cold ice heavenly art. Afterward, he would step down from the position of palace master, allowing Danbake to inherit it. Within, Danbake came to understand that this may have been Yowon's intention from the beginning. By becoming his disciple, Yowon had also become part of the palace, while still ensuring that Danbake's autonomy remained intact. When questioned about his schedule, Danbake noted that Yowon was preparing for another interrogation. An elder suggested that it might be better to execute Dan Juchin immediately, even if some opposed the decision. Ambake agreed with that stance. Danbake, however, hesitated. Executing him now could provoke resistance from the elders and followers who still supported him. Within, uncertainty lingered. Keeping Dan Juchin alive posed a danger, yet killing him could fracture the palace further. The final decision would be made soon, as Yowon had declared that the upcoming interrogation would be the last. Elsewhere, within a temporary detention chamber, an ice prison had been constructed. The cold was so intense that even Dan Juchin's body had grown numb, leaving him unable to move freely. He struck the walls repeatedly with his fists, but the ice did not yield. Within, he recognized the truth. The structure was far beyond anything created by the ice-white divine palm. It was the cold ice heavenly art, its power refined to a level that made the ice as strong as steel. No matter what he tried, he could neither break nor melt it. He had once believed it impossible for Yowon to master such an art so quickly. Now, he understood how wrong he had been. Even when compared to the righteous North Sword, Lee Mok, one of the 5 great martial artists of Zhongyuan, the difference had never felt this overwhelming. There was no other way to define Yowon but as a monster. Regret surfaced within him. Rather than waiting helplessly for death, he wished he had chosen to fight earlier, even if it meant dying in battle. At that moment, the entrance to the ice prison opened. Yowon stepped inside. Something about him had changed. Though Dan Juchin had been isolated for days, the difference was unmistakable. Standing in Yowon's presence now made it difficult to breathe. Within, realization struck. Yowon was no longer the same as before. His presence had deepened, suggesting that he had fully absorbed the dragon turtle's essence core. Yowon raised his hand and released the sealed blood points of Dan Juchin, restoring his ability to move and speak. He informed him that the body of the 6th elder, Wan Sang-o, had been discovered, and with it, the mystery surrounding the dragon turtle's missing head had been resolved. Dan Juchin remained silent. Yowon pointed out that he had undone the restriction precisely so he could respond, questioning his silence. Dan Juchin finally spoke, reiterating that he had no involvement and insisting that the head must have been stolen from the demonic cult's camp. Yowon clarified that the Orthodox Murim Alliance was not responsible either. This caught Dan Juchin off guard. He had believed that members of the alliance had also gone missing and assumed their involvement. Yowon revealed the truth. 2 days earlier, the remains of the Black Shadow Squad had been discovered nearly 40 kilometers southeast, their corpses partially devoured by beasts. More importantly, traces of the Berserk Saber Divine martial arts had been found on their bodies. Shock rippled through Dan Juchin as he realized the implication. The culprits were neither side they had suspected. Far away, atop the red mountain of Lhasa, stood the Potala Palace, a sacred site of Buddhism, often referred to as the second Mount Putuo. Ordinarily, the air would have been filled with the chanting of scriptures. Now it was filled with death. The palace grounds had been reduced to devastation. Flames consumed the remains of more than 1,000 corpses, and the stench of burning flesh hung heavily in the air. Amid the blackened ruins, small, radiant white spheres could be seen scattered across the ground. They were sarira, sacred relics left behind after cremation. Elder Huang Heol of the Saber sect observed the scene, remarking on the sheer number of sarira, noting that such a quantity was expected given that the dead were monks. Even so, witnessing it in reality left a strong impression on him. Another elder recalled that when the Dalai Lama's body had been burned, the amount of sarira produced had been enough to equal that of 10 individuals, a testament to his spiritual attainment. Huang Heol acknowledged this, yet pointed out that even such a figure had been unable to withstand more than 3 exchanges against the Blade Master. He then shifted his thoughts to the present, noting that it had already been 3 days since the Blade Master had entered the training hall after that battle, and he wondered how much longer it would take for him to fully absorb the gains. At that moment, the sound of wings cut through the air. A hawk descended from the sky and landed on Huang Heol's arm. Attached to its leg was a small message. He removed it and unrolled the paper. As he read its contents, his eyes widened in disbelief. The report confirmed that both the Blade Massacre Squad and the Demon Iron Squad had been completely wiped out. Stunned, he handed the hawk off to a subordinate and hurried into the White Palace. Moving quickly, he descended toward the Dalai Lama's chamber, where a massive iron door stood sealed. He knocked. After several attempts, the door began to open on its own. A surge of cold air poured out from within. Within, Huang Heol was shaken. Opening such a massive iron door, using only chi, was a feat beyond ordinary comprehension. The chilling air that escaped felt no different from the harsh winds of the northern sea, a clear sign of the immense power that lay beyond the threshold. At the center of the chamber lay the massive corpse of a headless giant bird. Its enormous body dominated the room, a spirit beast known as the Great Bird, a creature said to transform into a colossal fish in the Arctic. As Huang Heol searched the room, his gaze settled upon a figure seated atop the carcass. A middle-aged man meditated in silence. It was the Blade Lord. Without opening his eyes, the Blade Lord spoke, reminding him that interruptions were forbidden unless the matter was of utmost importance. Overcome with fear, Huang Heol immediately dropped to the ground, bowing deeply as he apologized. He then delivered the report. The Blade Massacre Squad, their leader, and the Demon Iron Squad had all been annihilated at the Northern Sea Ice Palace. The atmosphere shifted instantly, and a heavy force surged outward. Before Huang Heol could react, his body was lifted into the air and dragged toward the Blade Lord. A crushing grip seized his throat. The Blade Lord's voice turned cold as he interpreted the report as nothing but failure. Struggling to breathe, Huang Heol explained that the outcome had changed because of the demon god's intervention. At those words, the Blade Lord's expression darkened with anger. Huang Heol continued, explaining that without the demon god, they would have secured the Dragon Turtle's essence core without issue. He added that the young leader of the Northern Sea Ice Palace had sought help from the demonic cult, though they had still managed to obtain one of the Dragon Turtle's heads before everything collapsed. Before he could finish, a violent force hurled him across the room. His body slammed into the ground, and blood spilled from his mouth under the impact. Frustration burned within the Blade Lord as he considered the implication, whether the demon god had now set his sights on the 5 sacred beings as well. The knowledge of those beings traced back to the immortal White Classics, one of the 3 greatest books of mystery. The text compiled strange accounts from ancient times across its 108 pages, detailing the existence of the 5 sacred beings, the Kirin, the Phoenix, the Divine Turtle, the Winged Dragon, and others. Though most dismissed these accounts as myths, the descriptions were so vivid that it seemed as though the author had witnessed them firsthand. According to the text, these beings first appeared during the era of the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, with each new manifestation marking the end of an era. Some, like the Fire Kirin and the Dragon Turtle, were destructive forces that brought devastation upon humanity. Others, however, were peaceful, devoting themselves to cultivating spiritual chi. Within the book existed a cryptic passage, one that most had dismissed as mere fantasy, but one man had taken it seriously. Chen Shi Huang, the ruler who unified Zhongyuan, pursued the truth behind these beings with relentless obsession. Historical records told of an immortal physician named Seo Baek, who journeyed across Zhongyuan with thousands of young boys and girls in search of immortality on behalf of the emperor. Yet the expedition ended in mystery. Seo Baek vanished in Sichuan, and the emperor's wish was never fulfilled. Some believed that Seo Baek had indeed discovered the Great Peng, the legendary form of the Great Bird, but chose to disappear, fearing that granting such power would only fuel Qin Shi Huang's tyranny further. Inside the Dalai Lama's chamber within the White Palace of the Potala Palace, 4 documents lay spread out. Among them was a map pointing directly to the Potala Palace, marked with the words King's Belonging in its corner, a possession once tied to Seo Baek. A dense, overwhelming energy filled the room, making the very air feel heavy. The Blade Lord spoke with restrained fury. He reflected on the loss of the Dragon Turtle's essence core, following the earlier loss of the Fire Kirin. All of it had been part of a grand design, one built upon maps that recorded the locations of the 5 sacred beings. Huang Heol remained silent, and he knew that any attempt at justification would cost him his life. The Blade Lord's anger erupted. With a surge of power, he burned the maps, declaring them useless. 3 of them lifted into the air and turned to ash within moments. Only one remained. The Blade Lord issued a final command. Huang Heol was to head to Changbai Mountain, while he himself continued absorbing the remaining essence of the Great Bird. Huang Heol hesitated, recalling the danger of that place and the presence guarding its entrance. The Blade Lord dismissed the concern immediately. Defeating that man was never the objective. When pressed, he revealed his true intention. If the demon god had already obtained 2 of the 5 sacred beings' essence cores, then he too must be seeking immortality. It was inevitable that Youwon would head to Changbai Mountain next. Understanding dawned upon Huang Heol. The plan was not to confront Youwon directly, but to anticipate his arrival. Meanwhile, within the temporary ice prison of the Northern Sea Ice Palace, a transformation unfolded. The golden staff began to break apart. With a sharp, cascading sound, it disintegrated and reshaped itself into armor, spreading across Youwon's chest and upper back. Dan Jushin watched in shock as he realized that this was the true hidden power of the divine relic. Youwon confirmed it without hesitation. Within, Dan Jushin's thoughts spiraled. He had once believed Youwon's claim to the staff was mere coincidence, that he had only become its owner because he found it first. But this transformation proved otherwise. The relic had chosen him completely. Even the ancient records had never mentioned such an ability. It meant that not even the founding figures of the palace had fully witnessed its true power. At first, he had believed the cold ice heavenly art itself was the relic's secret. Now, he understood. The relic had truly acknowledged Youwon. A bitter realization formed deep within him. The ancestors had chosen someone outside their bloodline. Whether it was fate or consequence, he could no longer deny it. Youwon then spoke as he offered Dan Jushin a choice. If he wished for death, it would be granted immediately. But there was another path. If Dan Jushin swore loyalty, Youwon would grant him authority as the commander over the northern regions. Within, Dan Jushin's thoughts surged with disbelief and ambition. The offer before him meant ruling over the entire north as its commander. The divine relic, which had taken the form of armor, shifted once more, returning to its original shape as a golden staff. Youwon picked it up and handed it to him, presenting it as the symbol of his proposal. The moment Dan Jushin grasped the staff, his eyes lit up again. Inside, realization struck with overwhelming clarity. The relic no longer rejected him. More than that, the demon god himself had chosen to stand with him. In that instant, he recognized the man before him as possibly the strongest to ever exist. The thought of leaving his name in the history Youwon would carve out filled him with a sense of purpose greater than anything before. Without hesitation, he knelt, pressing his fist into his palm in formal respect, and accepted the offer with complete sincerity. He pledged his loyalty, acknowledging his own shortcomings while offering himself fully. Youwon accepted it. He appointed Dan Jushin as the commander of the North and named him the Third Great Elder. Dan Jushin responded with deep gratitude. At that moment, a martial master of immense strength, one worthy of standing among the 5 great martial artists, became Youwon's subordinate. It marked the first clear clear step toward Yo-Won's ambition to unite the Jianghu. Yo-Won observed him carefully, noting that he remained unaffected while holding the staff. 2 weeks earlier, after escaping the underground cavern, Yo-Won had begun infusing the staff with cold chi, gradually advancing through the levels of the cold ice heavenly art. He had mastered the technique with ease, aided by his own yin chi, yet he soon realized that the relic contained something far beyond the martial art itself, an ancient power hidden deep within. As he approached the 5th level, something unexpected occurred. A brilliant light erupted from the staff, pulling him into a space of infinite darkness. It was not unfamiliar. He had experienced the same phenomenon when he first obtained the Sky Demon's sword. Within that void, a vision unfolded. He witnessed an unknown middle-aged man clad in a white fur coat subduing a massive bird with colossal wings at the Northern Sea Ice Palace. After a prolonged struggle, the man drove the golden staff into the creature's heart. From that moment, an immense surge of energy flowed out from the great bird and was absorbed into the staff. The scene mirrored a memory Yo-Won already possessed, one where the Sky Demon's sword had been used to pierce the heart of an Amugi after severing its head. The truth became clear. The true power of the divine relic lay in the spiritual energy of the Great Pang. Though much of that power had faded over centuries of neglect, what remained began to harmonize with Yo-Won's own cold chi, strengthening his spiritual energy further. With time, he fully absorbed what was left within it. Following that, the staff gained the ability to disassemble and transform into armor. Curious about its nature, Yo-Won had NANO analyze the material. The result was unexpected. The golden staff was made from the same substance as the Heavenly Demon's sword, a material not found anywhere on Earth. Within, Yo-Won pieced together the implication. The staff had been forged from a meteor that fell in Yunnan, and its transformation ability mirrored that of the Heavenly Demon's sword. It suggested that both weapons shared a common origin. Holding two such artifacts could not be mere coincidence. Now that the spiritual energy within the relic had been fully absorbed, others could safely wield it. The divine relic had lost its former exclusivity. It remained symbolic, but no longer held the same power it once did. With that realization, Yo-Won saw no harm in entrusting it to someone as capable as Dan Jushin. Before him, Dan Jushin stood with the staff in hand, his face illuminated with unmistakable joy. Inside the physician's chamber of the Northern Sea Ice Palace, it took a long while for Chuninji to stabilize. Hobum expressed concern, noting that even with both the Demon Lord and the head guardian channeling true chi into him, there had been no sign of awakening. He urged that they should consider returning him to the cult as soon as possible. Within, Markham reflected on Yo-Won's earlier words, that Chuninji's condition might be the result of both the parasite that had once occupied his mind and the prolonged brainwashing. He recalled how even after suffering the side effects of the demonic blood reversal art, it had taken months for Chuninji to awaken. Given that he had endured even longer manipulation this time, there was no way to predict when he would recover. His thoughts deepened as he reflected on the past. Chuninji had been the first cult leader he had ever served. In his absence, everything had changed. The divine cult, once shaken by the sixth sex, had now been rebuilt into something far more formidable. Even the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect, once feared, now trembled before the current Demon Lord. His thoughts were abruptly interrupted. Chuninji suddenly coughed violently and awakened. Markham reacted instantly, ordering Hobum to summon Yo-Won at once. Hobum rushed out without delay. Chuninji struggled for breath, coughing repeatedly as he regained consciousness. Markham leaned in, asking if he was alright. Chuninji recognized him immediately, remarking that it had been 20 years since they last met, and expressing quiet disbelief that they were seeing each other again. Emotion overwhelmed Markham. Relief and joy filled him as he witnessed his former lord awaken, but the moment was interrupted as Chuninji coughed up blood. Alarmed, Markham pointed it out, but Chuninji calmly reassured him that it was not an internal injury. Still, Markham observed closely. Blood flowed not only from his mouth, but also from his nose. His condition was far from stable. Without delay, Chuninji sat down in a lotus position and began circulating his internal energy. Markham watched in astonishment. A golden energy radiated from Chuninji's body. Recognition struck instantly. It was the body transformation technique, a sacred cultivation method known only to the head of the Shaolin Temple. Within, Markham struggled to comprehend it. This technique, attributed to Bodhidharma, represented the pinnacle of orthodox cultivation. It was entirely different from the heavenly demon cultivation method and typically incompatible with it. To learn it, one would have to abandon their previous true chi entirely. Yet Chuninji was using it. Even more surprising, his condition visibly improved as the energy circulated through him. At that moment, Yowon entered the room. He immediately questioned the situation. Markham informed him that the former demon lord had awakened. Chuninji turned his gaze toward Yowon and froze. Despite reaching the mystic realm, despite believing he could gauge the strength of nearly anyone, he found himself unable to perceive Yowon's martial prowess at all. The young man standing before him appeared barely 20, yet his depth was immeasurable. Yowon bowed respectfully, introducing himself as Chun Yowon and offering greetings to the former supreme heavenly demon. The name struck Chuninji instantly. Shock spread across his expression as he recognized it. Within, memories resurfaced. He recalled the time when Yu Zhong had insisted on marrying a maid, despite the strong opposition of the sixth sex. Chuninji had been the one to mediate that conflict. Before leaving the cult, Yu Zhong had personally asked him to name their child. Markham revealed that the young man standing before him was none other than the current demon lord. Chuninji was visibly shaken. Within, disbelief surged. When he had left for the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect, Yu Zhong had still ruled the cult. He had expected that nothing would have changed. Yet now, a child outside the sixth sex had risen to become the demon lord. It was something he had never imagined possible. To him, it meant that Yowon had broken free from the long-standing cycle of manipulation, a miracle in itself. A faint smile formed on Chuninji's face. He expressed his surprise and asked Yowon to come closer. As Yowon stepped forward, Chuninji reached out and held his hand. He reflected on how small those hands had once been and how much he had grown. Looking at him now, he saw a striking resemblance to his mother. Within, something unfamiliar stirred in Yowon. A warmth spread through his chest, an emotion he had never truly experienced before. He realized it was familial affection. Yowon spoke softly, expressing his relief and addressing him as grandfather. Chuninji laughed warmly at the title, clearly pleased to hear it. Within, Yowon felt a quiet shift. He had always believed such emotions would be difficult to feel without a family of his own. Yet now, standing before his grandfather, those feelings rose naturally. It was something he had never known since childhood. Markham, witnessing the moment, chose to remain silent, allowing the two to share it. But the warmth did not last. Chuninji's expression suddenly darkened as urgency returned to him. He demanded to know their location. Markham reassured him, explaining that they were in the Northern Sea Ice Palace. The moment he heard it, panic took hold. Chuninji insisted that they had no time to waste. They needed to act immediately to prevent the dragon turtle's essence core from falling into the wrong hands. He warned that if all five were gathered, the consequences would be catastrophic. Yowon tried to calm him. He explained that there was nothing to worry about. The essence core had not been taken by their enemies. He revealed that he himself had obtained it. To prove it, Yowon raised his hand. Lightning chi crackled into existence, surging visibly across his palm. The sight stunned Chuninji. Realization settled in as he understood that Yowon truly possessed the power of the dragon turtle's essence core. Once the urgency eased, Yowon shifted the conversation. He acknowledged that Chuninji's condition was still unstable, but asked how he had been captured by the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect. Chuninji let out a heavy sigh. Regret filled his voice as he admitted that his own misjudgment had led to tragedy. He had believed his actions would protect both the Jianghu and the demonic cult, yet his mistake had resulted in the sacrifice of Abbot Gu Jung and others. Markham immediately recognized the name. Gu Jung was the former Shaolin abbot who had disappeared 18 years ago. Recalling past information, Markham connected the dots. Mo Yong-yun had mentioned that he was among the steel-masked martial masters. Chuninji urged caution, warning that the dragon turtle was not the only mythical creature. Others still remained: the Amugi, the Fire Kirin, the Great Peng, and the White Tiger. He was certain that the berserk saber of the sixth martial arts sect was pursuing them as well. Yowon responded calmly, stating that he was already aware. He revealed that he had prevented them from obtaining the Fire Kirin's essence core within the Imperial Tomb. Yowon continued, recalling an earlier incident. A spy within the demonic cult had once attempted to infiltrate infiltrate the treasury of the Demonic Arts Academy. In hindsight, Yo-won concluded that the target must have been the Amugi's essence core. Chun-inji struggled to process the revelation. Without further explanation, Yo-won raised his right arm. The black band wrapped around it shifted, transforming into the shape of a sword. Recognition struck instantly. Chun-inji realized what it was. The true heavenly demon sword, now infused with the essence core of the Amugi. The weight of that truth was overwhelming. Yo-won confirmed it without hesitation. He now possessed the essence cores of the Dragon Turtle, the Fire Kirin, and the Amugi. Chun-inji was left speechless. His body wavered as the realization shook him, and Mark-him quickly stepped forward to steady him before he collapsed. Watching this, Yo-won hesitated within, questioning whether he should reveal the truth about the Great Pang as well. After a moment, Chun-inji regained composure. With renewed clarity, he declared that he should properly offer his greetings. He dropped to one knee, formally introducing himself as Chun-inji, the 22nd leader of the Great Heavenly Demon Divine Cult, and paid respect to Yo-won as the second heavenly demon. Yo-won immediately tried to stop him, uncomfortable with the gesture. But Chun-inji only laughed, stating that there was nothing difficult about it. To him, this moment was the happiest day of his life. Within, Yo-won reflected on his grandfather's life. Chun-inji had carried the burdens of the cult alone, sacrificing everything for its survival. If the leaders of the six sects had possessed even a fraction of that resolve, the civil war might never have occurred. Chun-inji then spoke again, suggesting that Yo-won's achievements, the heavenly demon sword, and the gathered essence cores must have been guided by the will of the founding heavenly demon. Those words stirred a memory. Within, Yo-won recalled the moment he first obtained the heavenly demon sword. A figure believed to be Chun-ma had spoken then, implying that such an outcome would take longer than his own lifetime. The thought lingered briefly before Chun-inji drew him back to the present. He admitted that he might be reaching, but declared that it was time to reveal everything. He began recounting events from 25 years ago. At that time, under his leadership, the demonic cult had been expanding westward. The unorthodox alliance, led by Hang Yen, had recently risen to power after defeating one of the 5 great martial artists. The divine cult's military strength had overwhelmed them, pushing their forces all the way to Yunnan. Victory had seemed inevitable. Yet, despite their advantage, the six sects strongly opposed further expansion into the west. Mark-him recalled those days clearly. With their power, they could have advanced north into Zhongyuan, yet Chun-inji had chosen to focus on the west instead, a decision that had left many questioning his intentions. Chun-inji spoke slowly, his voice carrying the weight of decades. He explained that he had been bound by an oath, one forged 50 years ago during his youth when ambition burned brightly within him. Like the leaders before him, he had dreamed of expanding into the heart of the Jianghu. But that path had been stopped. The one who halted him was the former Shaolin abbot, Gu Jung. Though widely respected, Gu Jung had not been known for overwhelming martial strength. Yet after battling him for nearly half a day, Chun-inji realized a harsh truth. There were hidden grandmasters within the Jianghu, far beyond reputation. He lost that battle. It was his first defeat, and it left him with severe internal injuries. The humiliation ignited a desire for revenge, leading to an oath between the two. They would meet every 5 years and duel again. At that time, Gu Jung proposed that they meet alone, without armies, to prevent unnecessary deaths. That agreement marked the beginning of a long rivalry. For 20 years, Chun-inji never once defeated him. Then at their 5th duel, he finally won. It was a victory he had waited for his entire life. By their oath, it should have granted him the right to push northward into Zhongyuan. But he did not. Over those 25 years, rivalry had turned into mutual respect and eventually friendship. When Chun-inji finally surpassed him, he chose not to invade the north. Instead, he turned westward. Gu Jung had been a hero of the orthodox sects, but the truth of their bond was known only to them. They met not only to fight, but to share their burdens and speak as equals. Then everything changed. At one of their scheduled meetings, Gu Jung never appeared. Weeks passed. Soon after, news reached Chun-inji that one of Shaolin's 10 disciples had gone missing, and Gu Jung had personally gone to Anhui to search for him. Though it went against his principles to interfere in another sect's affairs, curiosity compelled him to investigate. Deep within a forest, he found traces of battle. One set of techniques clearly belonged to Shaolin. The other was unfamiliar, but disturbingly recognizable. It matched the traces left on the 7th cult leader after his encounter with the Blade God. Yo-Won immediately recognized the implication: the Berserk Saber divine martial arts. Chuninji acknowledged it. At first, he had dismissed it as nothing more than a story from the past, but upon seeing those traces firsthand, he realized the threat was real. After 2 days of searching, he found Gu Jung. The abbot was surrounded, fending off multiple martial masters within a valley. Chuninji joined the battle without hesitation. Together they defeated their enemies, though not without difficulty. What shocked him most was not the number of opponents, but the techniques they used. Though they wielded different weapons, their martial arts all originated from the same source: the Blade God. Gu Jung then gave a surprising order. He told Chuninji not to kill them all. Respecting his request, they captured several alive. When Chuninji questioned their identity, Gu Jung revealed the truth: they were descendants of the Blade God. The revelation struck deeply. The Blade God, a figure thought lost to history, still had successors. Chuninji initially believed Gu Jung had only discovered them while searching for the missing monk, but that assumption was wrong. Gu Jung had known about them for a long time. Chuninji then recounted the history. 500 years ago, the Blade God had appeared in the Jianghu. His first victim was Chun Muhui, the 7th leader of the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult and one of the 5 great martial artists. 2 years later, he struck again at Mount Song, killing Gong Wun, the revered Shaolin monk. The Jianghu united to hunt him, but failed. 2 years later, another great figure fell, the Iron Death Martial King of the Unorthodox Alliance. Then came the death of Chun Mui, the Wu-Tang Sword Immortal. One by one, the greatest figures of the era were cut down. Only one person ever stopped him: the Sword Demon of the Divine Cult. Chuninji explained that there was a reason why the Sword Demon had established the Demonic Arts Academy. Yo-Won answered without hesitation, stating that the Demonic Arts Academy had been created to prepare for the return of the Blade God and his successor. Chuninji was caught off guard, unable to understand how Yo-Won already knew this. Markim stepped in and explained that Yo-Won had already passed the 6th level of the Demonic Arts Academy, gaining access to the Sword Demon's will and the secrets hidden within. Shock gave way to laughter. Chuninji acknowledged that given Yo-Won's strength, it would have been stranger if he had not passed such a trial, but he clarified that the demonic cult had not been the only force preparing for the Blade God's return. When the Divine Monk of Shaolin and the Wu-Tang Sword Immortal, 2 pillars of the Orthodox Murim, were slain, the Orthodox factions had also taken action. They created a secret organization. Its name was the Hidden Recluse Forest. Within, Yo-Won recognized the name. It was said to be an organization that would appear only when chaos engulfed the Jianghu. For 500 years, no one had seen or heard from them, and most had dismissed them as nothing more than a myth. But Chuninji confirmed their existence. Gu Jung had been a member. He explained that after losing many of the greatest martial masters to the Blade God, the Orthodox Murim had no choice but to respond. However, their approach differed from that of the demonic cult. While the Sword Demon focused on cultivating powerful warriors to confront the Blade God directly, the Hidden Recluse Forest chose a different path. They would track him from the shadows. The problem was that the Blade God left no trace. Even so, they persisted, searching for clues long after others had abandoned hope. Their patience paid off. 200 years after the Blade God vanished, traces believed to be his were discovered in Baiyang Mountain in Jiangsu Province. But something was off. The techniques found there were incomplete and unstable, lacking the refinement seen in his earlier killings. It appeared as though someone was imitating him. Years later, more traces were found further north. These showed improvement, more developed, more refined, but still not comparable to the original Blade God's mastery. Yo-Won questioned whether the Hidden Recluse Forest had ever encountered him directly. Chuninji shook his head. Despite their efforts, the Blade God himself never appeared. Only traces of his techniques were found, scattered across time. Yet those traces revealed something crucial. Chuninji explained that over time, the techniques were gradually becoming closer to the ones used in the killings of the past. From this, the Hidden Recluse Forest formed a theory. The traces were not left by the Blade God himself, but by his descendants. Within, Yo-Won understood immediately. If the original techniques and methods had been lost, it would take generations to reconstruct them. Slowly, piece by piece, they would rebuild the art, each trace reflecting their progress toward the original mastery. Chuninji continued, emphasizing that the most critical truth was the existence of the Blade God's descendants. Once those descendants realized that the hidden recluse forest was tracking them, they began to move within the Zhonghu themselves, turning the hunt into a deadly exchange. By the time the hidden recluse forest understood what was happening, more than 3 of their martial masters had already vanished. In response, a Shaolin monk named Ju Am, who was also a member of the hidden recluse forest, volunteered to act as bait. His sacrifice allowed them to finally make contact with the descendants. Together, Chuninji and Gu Jung fought against them and managed to capture several alive. But before any information could be extracted, their heads exploded. They died instantly. The opportunity to uncover the truth was lost. Years later, they encountered another group, far more dangerous than before. Among them was a man whose martial prowess far surpassed the others. He appeared alongside figures wearing steel masks. That man mocked them, telling them to enjoy a reunion with their old friends. At the time, Chuninji did not understand what he meant. After a fierce battle, they managed to defeat the martial master of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect and capture the masked individuals. Only then did the truth reveal itself. When the masks were removed, the identities of those beneath them shocked everyone. Among them was Ju Am. The others were martial masters of the hidden recluse forest, people they had believed dead. They were not themselves. All of them were under a form of hypnosis. Chuninji and Gu Jung attempted everything they could to break the control, but before they could succeed, the parasites within their heads activated and exploded, killing them instantly, except for one, Ju Am. His hypnosis had already begun to weaken. Before dying from his wounds, he revealed that the Berserk Saber sect had grown powerful enough to threaten the entire Zhonghu. Though they could not save him, his body revealed something crucial. Unlike the others, the parasite in his head had not detonated. With permission, they examined it and discovered the reason. The parasite was dormant, as if in hibernation. From this, they reached a conclusion. The power of Buddhism had suppressed it. Yo-Won immediately understood and asked whether Chuninji had learned the muscle tendon changing classic for that reason. Chuninji confirmed it. He had done so in order to infiltrate the enemy. More than that, he revealed another truth. He himself had been a member of the hidden recluse forest. The revelation shook Yo-Won. Chuninji explained further, the muscle tendon changing classic was a technique that stabilized both mind and body. Through their findings, he and Gu Jung realized that it could suppress both the parasite and the hypnosis. With that knowledge, they formed a plan. They would use it to infiltrate the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect from within. Markim asked if Chuninji's long isolation had been for the sake of learning the muscle tendon changing classic. Chuninji confirmed it, but added that it had not been his only purpose. He had also been searching for the missing cultivation method of the Heavenly Demon Sword art. He believed that the Heavenly Demon Sword art was the only technique capable of countering the Berserk Saber divine martial arts. Yet without its proper cultivation method, the sword art itself remained incomplete. Recovering it had taken immense time and effort. Originally, he had intended to remain within the divine cult until he fully mastered the muscle tendon changing classic. But as he progressed, the Buddhist energy within him grew stronger. He feared that Chun Yu-jong or the Sixth Sex would eventually notice the change. So he made a decision. He left the cult earlier than planned. After years of preparation, he infiltrated the enemy by deliberately allowing himself to be defeated. Markim could no longer hold back. Overcome with emotion, he dropped to his knees, questioning why Chuninji had chosen to bear such a burden alone. If he had only spoken, he would have helped. Chuninji responded with a gentle smile. Markim had his own duty. As the guardian of the heavenly demon's authority, Chuninji could not allow him to abandon that responsibility. At those words, Markim broke down completely. Yo-Won stood in silence, restraining his own emotions. Within, realization settled heavily. His grandfather had not been captured. He had walked into that hell of his own will. Chuninji continued. After being taken, he awakened in what he believed to be their base. At first, they attempted to negotiate, trying to extract secrets of the Zhonghu. When that failed, they turned to threats and torture. Yo-Won had already seen the scars. The marks on his body told the story clearly. Even recalling it now, anger surged within him. Chuninji admitted his mistake. He had believed that enduring the torture would eventually allow them to uncover the truth. Instead, they were subjected to nearly 10 years of suffering. In the end, even he succumbed. Their hypnosis techniques had surpassed the resistance offered by the muscle tendon changing classic. He retained no memory of the time he spent under their control, yet he did not die. They believed they had completely converted him, turning him into a piece of their great scheme. Still, there were moments, brief, fragile gaps, when he managed to regain clarity. During those times, he tried to uncover their true objective, but it was nearly impossible. Surrounded constantly by martial masters, he could not freely use the muscle tendon changing classic. Sometimes it took a month just to regain awareness, sometimes longer. His memories became fragmented because of it. Over time, the parasite and hypnosis adapted to the energy of the technique. He suspected the same had happened to Gu Jung. Yo-won asked whether he had learned anything. Choninji shook his head. Their organization was too precise. They used a coded language, one he could barely understand. Within, Yo-won considered the possibility that it might be simplified characters, the same form used in the Divine Physician's text they had sought. Had Choninji been able to retrieve even a fragment, Yo-won might have been able to decipher it, but under those conditions, it had been impossible. Choninji explained that in the end, the only thing he could manage was to copy fragments of what he had seen. Yo-won reacted with immediate interest. Choninji confirmed it. The real challenge had been getting those copies out, but an opportunity had finally come. During the operation involving the dragon turtle's essence core, he had briefly regained consciousness while in Hubei. In that moment, he managed to hide what he had recorded. Though his memories remained incomplete, he believed the coded writings were likely left behind by the founders of that organization. Within, Yo-won recognized the importance of this. If those writings truly trace back to the origin of the Berserk Saber divine martial arts, they might reveal the Blade God's true objective. Choninji continued. During the battle with the dragon turtle, his consciousness had briefly returned again. Seizing that chance, he entrusted his plaque to a young member of the Northern Sea Ice Palace, instructing him to seek help. He never imagined that it would be Yo-won who would ultimately save him. He regarded it as nothing short of a miracle. Then he returned to the central issue. When Yo-won asked why the enemy was so desperate to obtain the essence cores, Choninji revealed the truth. If what they had uncovered was correct, gathering the essence cores of all 5 sacred beings would grant eternal life, true immortality. Markham questioned whether such a thing was even possible. Choninji confirmed it. If all 5 essence cores were gathered, immortality could be achieved. Within, Yo-won processed the implication. It explained the obsession driving their enemies. It also aligned with what he had witnessed before, records suggesting that the Blade God had lived for nearly 1,000 years. If that was true, then immortality was no myth. A realization followed. He had already obtained multiple essence cores, though not by deliberate pursuit. Each had come through circumstance. The Imugi, the Fire Kirin, the Dragon Turtle, and even the Great Peng's spiritual power through the Cold Ice Staff. It almost felt like fate guiding him. Choninji expressed relief upon hearing that Yo-won possessed 3 of the cores, believing it prevented the Blade Master from gaining complete dominance. Yo-won chose not to correct him. Choninji then warned that the Blade Master likely already possessed the essence core of the Great Peng from the Patala Palace. Yo-won understood immediately. There must be more than one Great Peng or source of its power, given the age of the Northern Sea relic. Choninji pressed further. If the Blade Master had already secured such power, then his next target would undoubtedly be the Wind-White Tiger. He warned Yo-won not to underestimate him. When Choninji had encountered the Blade Master within the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect, he had witnessed his true strength firsthand. In that battle, 20 brainwashed martial masters, 2 at the Mystic Realm and 18 at the Evolutionary Realm, had fought him simultaneously. They were defeated in under 15 minutes. The memory alone was enough to define the man as a monster. Choninji urged Yo-won to act quickly. Even with 3 essence cores, the battle would be difficult if the Blade Master possessed multiple as well. But if Yo-won secured the Wind-White Tiger's core first, even that monster might not be able to contend with him. He emphasized that the Blade Master's techniques transcended the limits of the human body, something only achievable through extreme mastery. Against such power, only the Heavenly Demon Sword art could serve as a counter. Choninji then revealed that before infiltrating the enemy, he had completed the missing cultivation technique for the Heavenly Demon Sword art. It would enhance the technique's effectiveness significantly. He urged immediate action, offering to teach it so that Yo-won could fully revive the art. Yo-won hesitated briefly, then he apologized. He explained that he had already discovered the cultivation method left behind by an ancestor on the Sapphire Gravestone, and had completed the Heavenly Demon Sword art. The word stunned Chuninji. Shock spread across his face as he struggled to process it. He admitted, almost in disbelief, that his own grandson continued to surpass all expectations. Within, Yo-Won held back another truth. He knew that revealing he had already combined the Heavenly Demon Sword art with the Berserk Saber Divine Martial Arts would likely be too much even for Chuninji to handle. 5 days after Chuninji regained consciousness, Chun Yo-Won and the demonic cult prepared to depart from the Northern Sea Ice Palace and return to the Jianghu. Dan Baek approached Yo-Won asking him to stay longer. Yo-Won immediately saw through him, pointing out that he did not truly mean it. Dan Baek insisted, claiming he still had much to learn. Yo-Won cut him off, stating that everything had already been taught. He made it clear that he would return later to assess whether Dan Baek had properly mastered it. At those words, Dan Baek's face paled. The thought that he would be free from training during Yo-Won's absence shattered instantly. Yo-Won reinforced his intent. Dan Baek was his first disciple, and there would be no abandoning his responsibility. He declared that 5 members of the 6 swords would be sent periodically to monitor his progress. Left with no choice, Dan Baek bowed and promised not to disappoint him. Yo-Won observed him quietly. In his view, Dan Baek lacked both natural talent and genuine passion for martial arts, despite being born into a martial clan. Compared to him, Dan Juchin was far more suited to lead the palace. Dan Baek had simply been fortunate. With that, Yo-Won signaled their departure, reminding him once more not to neglect his training. Dan Baek responded obediently, though his expression remained strained. Nearby, Hobum casually suggested renaming the Northern Sea Ice Palace into a branch of the Heavenly Demon Divine cult, imagining a grand title for it. Before he could finish, Sanghwa struck him on the back of the head, cutting him off. Hobum protested, but Sanghwa warned him to watch his words. As he looked ahead, Hobum noticed the presence of the palace's elders. Dan Juchin now stood among them as the 3rd great elder, accompanied by 2 others. Yo-Won paid them little attention. He had no intention of allowing Dan Juchin to gather influence unchecked. Trust had yet to be earned. Even so, to preserve appearances, he permitted around 100 of Dan Juchin's followers to remain with him. Not far away, 2 figures watched anxiously. Mo Young-yu voiced concern about their uncertain fate. Jagal Sohee attempted to calm him, reasoning that as hostages, they would not be harmed easily. But Mo Young-yu remained uneasy, recalling Yo-Won's ruthless nature. Within, Jagal Sohee assessed the situation more strategically. Their captivity served a purpose, in exchange for the Murim Alliance's contingent forces. It suggested that Yo-Won was not yet ready to wage full-scale war against the Orthodox Murim Alliance. For now, their focus would likely shift toward eliminating the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. Mo Young-yu, however, remained fearful. He insisted that they should escape at the first opportunity, convinced that Yo-Won's unpredictability could turn against them at any moment. Jagal Sohee questioned whether escape was even possible. Mo Young-yu refused to give up, though fear lingered in his voice. He insisted that even in the worst situations, an opportunity could appear, and when it did, they should at least attempt to seize it. Before he could finish, Baekji's voice cut through. He announced that the Demon Lord had summoned Mo Young-yu. Fear overtook him instantly. He stammered, unable to understand why he was being called, convinced he had done nothing wrong. Within, Jagal Sohee sighed, realizing that despite his words, Mo Young-yu lacked the courage to act. When brought before Yo-Won, Mo Young-yu stood tense. Yo-Won asked him about the Moyong clan's territory in Liaoning, confirming whether he was familiar with the region. Mo Young-yu nodded, though fear gripped his thoughts. He wondered if Yo-Won intended to eliminate his clan, but Yo-Won's intent was different. He ordered him to act as a guide when they reached Liaoning, specifically to lead them to Changbai Mountain. That same evening, within the demonic castle of the 10,000 Mountains, Chun Yu-jong had recovered enough to move freely. His routine had stabilized. Treatment in the morning, recovery of internal energy in the afternoon. At that moment, Right Guardian Submang arrived, bringing news. At the mention of his father, Chun Yu-jong reacted with visible shock. Submang confirmed not only that his father had been found, but also that the Demon Lord had brought the Northern Sea Ice Palace under the control of the demonic cult as a subordinate sect. The weight of the achievement stunned him. Yo-Won had already seized Kaifeng, altered the balance of power, and now absorbed an entire sect. Submang laughed with pride, recalling how he had once recognized Yo-Won's potential. To him, Yo-Won was nothing short of a blessing to the cult. Chun Yujong, however, fell into quiet reflection. He thought of Yun Hua, his late wife. Within, he admitted that their child had surpassed him. Still, the news filled him with satisfaction. He began to celebrate, ordering drinks, but his words were abruptly cut short. In an instant, sword chi shot toward the window. It had not even fully formed into a blade, lingering near the opening. Submeng was startled, questioning what had happened. Chun Yujong explained that he had sensed someone eavesdropping. Submeng doubted it. The location was heavily secured. No one should have been able to bypass their defenses. After a moment, Chun Yujong dismissed it as a mistake. Though his origin chi was damaged, the idea that his senses had faltered unsettled him. Still, he let it go and returned inside with Submeng. Far above, atop the peaks of the 10,000 mountains, something unnatural stirred. The air itself flickered. A strange, fabric-like distortion appeared and vanished repeatedly, as if space itself were unstable. Then it tore and a figure emerged. His clothes were sliced, blood dripping from his body as frustration filled his expression. He realized that Chun Yujong had nearly detected him, not through sight, but through sheer perception. The man standing there was no ordinary intruder. It was Chun Musong, a being from the future, and the director of Sky Corporation. Musong examined the cut across his body and noticed smoke rising from a device inside his bag. A sharp groan escaped him as he quickly pulled it out and hurled it away with all his strength. The circular object spun through the air before being violently dragged into a distorted space, vanishing with a roaring pull. Within, frustration surged. He realized how close he had come to being swallowed along with it. The loss stung. One of his precious time packs had been wasted, leaving him with only 2 remaining. The situation worsened in his mind. Traveling all the way to the demonic cult on foot was not an option, and moving carelessly risked exposure. At that moment, a sharp mechanical beeping echoed from the bracelet on his wrist. Irritation crossed his face. He understood immediately. They had already detected him. Using 2 time packs had been enough to alert them, and their response speed was faster than he expected. Without hesitation, he pulled out another time pack. The moment he activated it, space trembled as a surge of blue light engulfed him. In the next instant, his figure vanished completely. Within the Orthodox Murim alliance, the balance of power between its 3 major factions had long prevented its highest authorities from gathering in one place. Even more so, after the emergence of the 4th force, the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect, such unity had become nearly impossible. Yet today was different. The very figures who had not even assembled during the Murim Neutrality Pact had gathered inside the Great Conference Hall. The scale of attendance far exceeded any previous assembly. Leaders of clans, heads of sects, and commanders of powerful combat groups filled the hall. Only a few were absent, those who had either perished or failed to return from recent conflicts. Moyang Kang had not returned from the north. Huang Bo had died in the northern sea. The head of the Namgung sect had fallen at Jin Castle. Another leader had been assassinated by the Berserk Saber sect. 2 commanders were also missing, one consumed by despair, the other lost in battle. The tension in the room was suffocating. Elder Pung observed the atmosphere, unable to hide his unease as he questioned what could have caused such an urgent summons. At that moment, the great leader Yi Mok stepped forward. He thanked everyone for responding and made it clear that time was limited. Without delay, he ordered someone to enter. A man in a black uniform walked into the hall. He had half-white hair and weary, drooping eyes. It was Mecha Jong, the adjutant of the Black Shadow Squad. From within the crowd, Hyunja recognized him immediately and questioned why he had returned. Mecha Jong had been sent north alongside squad leader Kang, yet now he stood here alone. Mecha Jong introduced himself. He declared that he now held the position of the Black Shadow Squad's leader. Shock rippled through the hall. Whispers spread rapidly as the gathered leaders struggled to comprehend what had happened to the previous squad. Yimok raised his voice, urging everyone to remain silent and hear the report first. Mecha Jong did not hesitate. He delivered his words bluntly. He had discovered the base of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect. The moment those words landed, the hall erupted. Shock, disbelief, and urgency filled the air as murmurs spread among the leaders. The question arose immediately: where was this hidden base? As all eyes fixed on him, awaiting an answer, Mecha Jong raised his hand and pointed to a location. He revealed that the base of the Berserk Saber of the 6 martial arts sect was hidden in the Yellow Mountain region of Hangzhou Zhejiang. A wave of disbelief spread through the hall. Master Peng reflected on the location, recognizing it as both breathtaking and treacherous. A place filled with steep peaks and natural dangers, making it an ideal hiding ground. Hong Pao-wu questioned how such a discovery had been made. Even the beggar sect, renowned for its intelligence network, had lost operatives trying to enter Jiangsu and Zhejiang. Mecha-Zhong acknowledged the doubt, but requested that they first examine the evidence. With Yi Mok's approval, the doors opened. Two men entered, pushing a massive cart. The moment its contents were revealed, shock rippled through the hall. It was the severed head of the dragon turtle. Its enormous size matched the legends. Its lifeless eyes turned over in death. Leaders rose from their seats, drawn closer to confirm what they were seeing. But that was not all. Another cart was brought in. Covered in woven straw, it concealed decomposing bodies. When uncovered, the sight was horrifying. Each corpse bore the same fate. Their heads had exploded. The stench filled the hall, forcing many to cover their noses. Hong Pao-wu, shaken but focused, stepped forward to inspect them. Within, he recalled the identifying mark of the Berserk Saber sect, the deliberate destruction of internal energy pathways to conceal their techniques. After examining the bodies, he confirmed it. They were indeed members of the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect. Yi Mok then addressed the assembly. The evidence spoke for itself. The dragon turtle's head from the Northern Sea and the corpses of their enemies. Mecha-Zhong and the Black Shadow Squad had tracked them, discovered their base, and returned with proof. Still, questions remained. Elder Hyunja asked how such a feat had been possible when even their best spies had failed to infiltrate the region. Mecha-Zhong answered plainly. He would not have survived had the enemy's full force been present. When he found the base in Yellow Mountain, most of their forces were absent. Hearing this, Hyunja pressed further. Mecha-Zhong explained that if they launched an attack now, they had a real chance to destroy the base. Understanding began to spread. Hong Pao-wu realized the implication, the reason for this emergency gathering. At that moment, Yi Mok called upon the military leader. Yu Ru stepped forward and delivered critical intelligence. According to their spies within the Unorthodox Alliance, the leader of the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect had departed for Lhasa in Tibet, taking the majority of his forces with him. The opportunity before them was clear. Yi Mok revealed that some among them were already aware. Part of the Berserk Saber sect's forces had been dispatched toward the Northern Sea. Master Peng immediately grasped the implication. The earlier decision to send forces there had not been random. It had been a calculated move in response to this threat. Yu Ryu then laid out the truth. Based on all gathered intelligence, the Berserk Saber of the Six Martial Arts sect was not merely seeking domination over Zhongyuan. Their targets extended far beyond that, to the Imperial Palace, the Northern Sea, and even Lhasa. More specifically, they were pursuing mythical creatures. Shock spread across the hall. The leaders quickly connected it to past events, recalling how the demonic cult had once sought the Fire Kirin's blood. Yu Ryu stepped forward and produced a book, Immortal White Classics. Confusion turned into unease as he clarified. The Berserk Saber sect was not after the creatures themselves, but their essence cores. At first, some assumed it was for increasing internal energy, but Yu Ryu shook his head. He revealed the deeper truth recorded within the text. Whoever gathered the essence cores of all 5 sacred beings would attain immortality. The hall fell into stunned silence. The idea sounded like a legend, something emperors of old had once pursued in vain. Yet the consistency of the enemy's actions made it impossible to dismiss. Yi Mok acknowledged their disbelief but redirected their focus. Immortality itself was not the immediate concern. What mattered was that this knowledge exposed the enemy's true objective and could be used against them. At that moment, Yu Ryu laid out the strategy. He placed markers on 2 key locations, Mount Huang, the enemy's base, and Changbai Mountain in Liaoning. Then he declared it. The Orthodox Murim Alliance would initiate an all-out war. The words carried immense weight. For decades, conflicts between factions had remained limited. Skirmishes, proxy battles, controlled clashes. But this would be total war. The room grew heavy with tension. Some, like Hyunjin-ja of the Wu-Tang sect, immediately considered the risks. If they mobilized fully, the western regions, already unstable, could become vulnerable. Yu Ryu addressed the concern directly. The Unorthodox Alliance was currently in chaos, weakened by internal civil war. There would be no interference. This was the perfect moment to strike. But then Mechajong added a crucial piece of information. The demon god already possessed the dragon turtle's essence core. The atmosphere shifted instantly. That alone made Yo-1 a terrifying variable, one they could barely account for even before this revelation. Yu-Ryu concluded firmly, this war was not only an offensive move, it was a preventive one. If they did not act now, the balance of the entire Jianghu could fall into irreversible ruin. Jigal Yungen questioned the logic behind the plan. If the demon god already possessed an essence core, he could not understand what exactly they were trying to prevent. Yu-Ryu answered calmly, it was not over yet. He admitted that even he could not confirm whether all mythical creatures truly existed, but there was one legend they could not ignore, one tied to Changbai Mountain. Hyunja immediately understood. Yu-Ryu confirmed it, the Wind White Tiger. According to the Immortal White classics, Changbai Mountain was home to one of the 5 sacred beings, the Wind White Tiger, and by extension, its essence core. Monk Guk-yan concluded that if such a creature existed, both the Berserk Saber sect and the demonic cult would inevitably target it. Yu-Ryu then finalized the strategy. The alliance would divide into 2 forces. One would march toward Hangzhou to strike the Berserk Saber sect's base at Yellow Mountain. The other would head to Changbai Mountain. On the strategic map, the Blade Master of the Berserk Saber sect was marked as the king, while the demonic cult's northern forces were represented as the vehicle. The implication was clear. They intended to intercept both threats and seize control of the situation before either side could claim the final essence core. No one voiced opposition. The gravity of the situation had erased all hesitation. Meanwhile, Mechajong observed silently, a faint smirk forming. Within, he reflected on the fallen, acknowledging that their deaths had ultimately served a greater purpose. At the same time, across the vast Great Plains, the demonic cult advanced steadily toward the southeast. Within 5 days, they had crossed half the plains. As night fell, the procession halted. Bonfires were lit and camps were established. Among the structures brought from the Northern Sea Ice Palace were large tent-like shelters. Hobum stared at them in amazement. He immediately recognized them and grew excited when one was assigned to him. His enthusiasm was obvious as he stepped inside, impressed by the cool and spacious interior. Dan Juchin watched him, noting that despite possessing strength comparable to an elder, his personality remained shallow and carefree. He casually asked Mongmu if he required one as well. Mongmu declined, suggesting instead that such comfort should be reserved for the Demon Lord. Dan Juchin noticed Yo-1 was absent. Mongmu assumed he was with Chun-Inji. Dan Juchin understood. They were likely training again. A short distance away, in a quiet meadow illuminated by firelight, Chun-Inji stood with a sword in hand. The flames flickered as he moved, and his blade traced precise and elegant arcs through the air. Each motion carried the essence of the heavenly demon sword force. He executed the form smoothly, reaching the 4th with controlled mastery. A sense of satisfaction settled over him. From nearby, Yo-1 watched. He acknowledged the display, recognizing the depth and refinement in his grandfather's technique. Chun-Inji acknowledged Yo-1's praise with quiet humility, explaining that even following the basics while using the proper circulation technique brought out immense force. Within, however, a sense of reflection lingered. The cultivation method he had spent years creating now felt insignificant in comparison. The founding heavenly demon's genius far surpassed anything he had achieved. A faint regret surfaced. Had he cultivated this path instead of Buddhist methods, his power might have reached even greater heights. But now, it was too late to change the foundation of his internal energy. Yo-1 then asked if he would attempt the 5th technique. Chun-Inji refused. Though he understood the theory, he admitted that unifying the movements was far too difficult. He felt both grateful for the opportunity and regretful that he could not go further. Yo-1 responded firmly. It was only natural for him to learn the Heavenly Demon Sword art, but Chun-Inji hesitated, questioning whether it was right for someone who had already stepped down from leadership to learn the cult's strongest martial art. Yo-1 corrected him. It was not the strongest. He chose not to hide anything. Given everything Chun-Inji had sacrificed, he deserved to know the truth. Chun-Inji, confused, asked what he meant. Yo-1 revealed that at the bottom of the cliffs in the abandoned Sword Valley, there existed traces of an unfinished technique left behind by the founding heavenly demon. Chun-Inji was taken aback. An unfinished technique? Yo-1 told him it would be better to witness it directly. Under the moonlit sky, Yo-1 moved. His sword traced a path so refined and unnatural that it seemed to defy the limits of the human body. Each motion flowed into the next with impossible precision. As the technique unfolded, Chun-Inji's eyes trembled. Within, disbelief took hold. The sword path was beyond human capability. It resembled a fusion, something that combined the essence of the heavenly demon sword with the berserk saber divine martial arts, yet transcended both. It was not merely difficult, it was something that should not exist. When Yo-won finished, he stated that this was the technique. Chun-Inji struggled to comprehend it, realizing that this was what the ancestor himself had failed to complete. Yo-won clarified, it was a technique abandoned before completion, and he had chosen to name it the Demon God Sword Art, a martial art that no one else could ever master. 4 days later, the demonic cult's procession neared Changbai Mountain, reaching the northern border of Liaoning. As they advanced, sudden surges of lightning chi burst from Baekji's body. The energy startled his horse, throwing it into chaos. Despite his skill, he could not control it. Eventually, he was forced to dismount. Wang Hu burst into laughter, mocking him for his inability to properly ride. Baekji clenched his thoughts in frustration. Within, he realized the truth. Even a brief lapse in control had caused this. His impatience had led him to recklessly consume the dragon turtle's blood. Now, its overwhelming power was becoming a burden he could barely contain. The members of the Six Swords Troop, bound together since their days in the Demonic Arts Academy, had always sharpened themselves through relentless duels. Baekji had once stood among them as a contender for the higher ranks, competing directly with Ko Wang-hul, but over time, he began to fall behind. Even Munku surpassed him. Ko Wang-hul advanced further, reaching the evolutionary realm. In an effort to close the gap, Baekji inherited Chun Yo-won's new martial arts. But even that was not enough. Then came the blow that shattered his pride. He lost to Hobum, the same Hobum he had always considered beneath him. That defeat struck deeper than anything before it. Hobum was no longer the man he once was. After enduring countless trials at Yo-won's side, he had grown into something entirely different. The loss ignited something reckless within Baekji. His desire to become the strongest beneath the Demon Lord consumed his judgment. Before anyone could stop him, he drank the dragon turtle's blood, pure and undiluted. He ignored the obvious danger, disregarding how even the warriors of the Northern Sea Ice Palace had perished from the lightning chi within it. In his mind, the justification was simple. If Hobum could survive the Fire Kirin's blood, then so could he. Even if it meant death, he was willing to gamble everything, and the result came swiftly. Lightning chi surged within him. Like Hobum, who had gained flame chi, Baekji now possessed a new power, but it came at a cost. He nearly died. Only Yo-won's timely intervention saved him, suppressing the raging lightning chi before it consumed him entirely. Even so, the power remained unstable. At the slightest lapse in focus, it would erupt uncontrollably. Yo-won observed the difference. Unlike Hobum's case, where the Fire Kirin's blood had been tempered, this was raw, fresh power, filled with far greater spiritual force. He explained the solution clearly. Baekji needed to completely convert the lightning chi into true chi. Only then would he gain control. But that required reaching the evolutionary realm. Now, in the present, Baekji understood the reality. It was not as simple as it had sounded. Though he possessed both internal energy and lightning chi, he lacked the control to unify them. For a moment, doubt crept in. He questioned whether Hobum was simply more talented, but then he corrected himself. Hobum had not grown stronger out of insecurity or competition. He had simply remained true to his path. Baekji realized his own mistake. He had rushed, he had let pride dictate his actions, and now he had to accept the consequences. As his focus wavered, lightning chi burst out again and pain surged through him. Hobum, watching from atop his horse, spoke with unusual seriousness, acknowledging how difficult it was to control such power and remarking that great strength carried great responsibility. For a brief moment, Baekji was taken aback. He had not expected such words from him, but the illusion quickly shattered. Hobum admitted with a laugh that he could not even sleep at night because he spent all his time trying to suppress the heat within his body. Frustration returned instantly. Baekji dismissed his earlier thoughts and walked away, unwilling to accept losing to someone like him. Nearby, Chun-Inji watched the interaction with amusement, noting how lively and unique Yo-won's subordinates were. Within, Yo-won reflected quietly. When he first met Hobum, that bright personality had been suppressed by his past. Now he had become someone who could lift the mood of those around him, and for that, Yo-won felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Yo-won turned to Mo-young-yu as they reached the borders of Liaoning, asking if he could guide them to Changbai Mountain. Mo-young-yu hesitated. His unease was obvious. He questioned whether they were truly heading there. Mong-mu immediately stepped in, rebuking him for daring to question the Demon Lord. Yo-won, however, remained calm. He had already noticed Mo-young-yu Yu's hesitation earlier. Now, he pressed him directly, asking what exactly he feared. After a long pause, Mo Yong-yu finally revealed it. There was an unspoken rule among the people of Liaoning that no matter what, no one should enter Changbai Mountain. Choninji reacted with surprise. Yo-won demanded an explanation. Mo Yong-yu admitted that this warning had been passed down through generations. Neither he nor his ancestors had ever dared to approach the mountain's depths. To him, it was forbidden. Yo-won questioned the reasoning. Mong-mu suggested it might simply be related to border tensions with the Dongyi people, but Mo Yong-yu shook his head. According to his grandfather, something far more dangerous lay there. A monster, something that guarded the mountain, something that no one should approach if they wished to live. Through telepathy, Chuninji spoke to Yo-won. He vaguely recalled hearing similar rumors while within the Berserk Saber sect. Even their higher-ups had spoken of a being that guarded Changbai Mountain. Yo-won immediately connected it. The White Tiger. If that monster was indeed the Wind-White Tiger, then the situation would become far more complicated. Chuninji agreed, but clarified that it might not be that simple. When Yo-won asked who he meant, Chuninji met his gaze and revealed the name. The god of the east, Arkwui. 2 days earlier, near the eastern regions between Liaoning and Jilin, the earth trembled under the march of thousands. An army advanced. It belonged to the Orthodox Mirim Alliance. 5,000 elite martial artists moved as one, their presence alone enough to devastate an entire province. Ho Hyunja, one of the masters, reflected on the scale of it. Even in all his years, he had never witnessed such a force gathered in one place. Beside him, Monk Sathi voiced concern. He questioned whether bringing such a massive army to Changbai Mountain was truly the right decision. Hyunja shared the same doubt. He believed it might have been wiser to station the majority of their forces near Hangzhou to strike the Berserk Saber sect's base. Hong Pal-woo challenged their thinking. After hearing the strategist's plan, he found it strange that they still failed to understand the necessity. Hyunja clarified his concern. It was not disagreement, but confusion. Why commit a third of their total strength just to secure the essence core of a mythical creature? Monk Guk Yan responded. He implied that Hyunja's recent rise to his position was the reason he did not yet fully grasp the situation. Then he asked a crucial question. Why had 200 men and the third general strategist, Oh Jaseo, already gone ahead to Changbai Mountain? Hyunja recalled the explanation. They had been sent to negotiate with the one who guarded the mountain. But even so, he struggled to understand. Even if that guardian was one of the 5 great martial artists, why such a force is needed? A heavy silence settled over the advancing army as Hong Pal-woo spoke. Arkwui was not merely one of the 5 great martial masters. If he had chosen to actively involve himself in the affairs of the Jianghu, there was no doubt that he would have been acknowledged as the strongest martial artist alive. Hyunja found it difficult to accept. Even knowing Arkwui's reputation, the way the others spoke of him felt exaggerated, almost unreal. Still, he tried to reason through it, thinking that if such a man stood on their side, even the overwhelming force of the demon god might be countered. Hong Pal-woo agreed, but only under the condition that everything went exactly according to plan. Nearby, Yan Youngin gazed toward the vast and ominous presence of Changbai Mountain and questioned whether the advance party, led by the third general strategist, would regroup with them regardless of success or failure. Master Peng quietly expressed his hope that Arkwui would agree to become their ally. However, that fragile hope did not last long. At the very front, Muguchin suddenly came to a halt. The leaders turned toward him, expecting an explanation, but before any words could be spoken, a thick and suffocating stench spread through the air. It was the unmistakable smell of blood. Not faint, not distant, but overwhelmingly strong, as if the very wind carried the remnants of a massacre. The scent clung to their senses, pressing down on their chests and sending an unsettling chill through the entire army. Murmurs began to rise among the leaders. This was not the aftermath of a small skirmish. The density of the blood in the air spoke of countless deaths. Hong Pal-woo immediately recognized the severity of the situation. The sheer intensity of the smell meant that many had died, far more than just a handful. An ominous aura filled the path ahead, as though something dreadful awaited them. Even so, retreat was not an option. Muguchin slowly raised his hand and issued a single command to move forward. The army moved forward, but the moment they advanced, a figure appeared. The air around him twisted as a powerful gust of wind surged outward. Then, in a single instant, instant he moved. Like a storm breaking loose, his body shot forward with terrifying speed, cutting through the plains as the wind howled violently around him. Monk Guk Yan felt his breath catch in his throat as recognition struck him, and his voice trembled as he spoke the name that sent a shock through everyone present. He was the god of the East, Ark Wui. A heavy stillness fell over the leaders of the Orthodox Murim Alliance. Every single one of them understood what that name meant. He was a man who stood at the absolute peak of martial arts, a being who relied on no weapon and fought solely with his fists, yet was the first among the 5 great martial masters to be granted the title of god. Muguchun's eyes narrowed as he focused on something far more troubling than the man's identity. Ark Wui's clothes were drenched in blood, fresh, thick, and unmistakable. At that realization, Monk Guk Yan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Muguchun stepped forward and called out to the man in the bamboo hat, declaring his identity as the first master of the Orthodox Murim Alliance and the leader of the Shangchi sword sect. He spoke with authority, explaining that their general strategist Ojiseo should have already arrived to warn him that both he and Changbai Mountain were in danger. His voice carried urgency as he demanded to know whether that message had been delivered. Yet no response came. The man remained still, his silence far more oppressive than any words. Monk Sati observed the situation carefully, sensing that Ark Wui's attention was fixed entirely on the mountain behind him. Despite the warning, the man showed no intention of speaking, as if everything else held no importance compared to what he guarded. Muguchun spoke again, attempting to ease the tension and clarify that their army had only gathered to prepare for an approaching threat. Before he could finish, a single word cut through the air, a cold command to leave. The surrounding leaders stiffened, realizing that negotiations were already slipping out of reach. One of the monks stepped forward, trying to reason with him, explaining that forces were already moving for the spirit beast hidden within the mountain. But Ark Wui did not waver. His voice remained calm yet absolute as he issued a final warning, making it clear that if they refused to leave, their lives would be the price. Monk Guk Yan immediately understood the situation. There was no room for negotiation. Muguchun's expression hardened as his hand moved to the hilt of his sword. Around him, the other masters mirrored his movement, their decision made in silence. The plan to persuade Ark Wui had failed. In that moment, Muguchun reached a conclusion. If Ark Wui was guarding this place alone, then neither the demonic cult nor the Berserk Saber sect had arrived yet. That meant there was still time. Even if it cost lives, they had to secure the Wind-White Tiger before anyone else. With that resolve, he declared that everything they were doing was to protect both Ark Wui and the mythical creature of Changbai Mountain, even if they had to resort to force. At his command, 7 masters shot forward at terrifying speed, cutting through the air as they charged toward Ark Wui. At the same time, the leaders of the Murim Alliance formed a precise formation, their positions aligning perfectly as their combined power surged. It was the Celestial Dipper Formation, a legendary technique inspired by the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. Each master took a designated position. At the center stood Muguchun, occupying the position of Megrez, the only weak point in the formation. As the strongest among them, he took that position to eliminate any vulnerability. With his internal energy surging, Muguchun unleashed the linked invincible sword, his blade cutting forward with overwhelming force as he directed the full power of the formation toward Ark Wui. But in that very instant, Ark Wui moved and simply raised his fist. The moment his fist extended, the space around it seemed to distort, as if the air itself had been seized and compressed. An invisible gust erupted outward with crushing force. Muguchun felt it immediately. Before he could even react, his sword was struck and shattered. Shock surged through Muguchun's mind. The blade he wielded was not ordinary. It was the treasured weapon of his sect, passed down through generations, yet it had been destroyed as if it were nothing. Before that realization could settle, Ark Wui moved again. In a single fluid motion, his body closed the distance and his leg struck with terrifying precision. The kick landed directly on Muguchun's jaw. A sickening crack echoed as bones shattered, and Muguchun's body was sent flying backward, thrown dozens of steps away like a broken puppet. Master Peng's bewilderment remained unconcealed, yet Ark Wui was already upon him. Caught in shock, Master Peng attempted to defend himself, but the man's fist struck faster than any reaction he could muster. The impact landed with a crushing force, and a cry tore from him as his body was hurled across the plains, dragged violently as it shattered every rock along its path. Hyunja moved with stealth, deciding to strike from behind. His blade thrust forward, yet it failed to reach Arc Wui. The moment the sword made contact, Arc Wui's form scattered like smoke. Hyunja registered the strange phenomenon in brief confusion as the target vanished before him. As they searched for his position, Monk Sathi's urgent cry rang out, directing their attention upward. The realization struck too late. Before any distance could be created, a devastating blow descended. The impact crushed down with overwhelming force, and Hyunja's neck snapped instantly. His body collapsed, his knees driven deep into the ground. Monk Sathi understood with chilling clarity that at this rate, none of them would survive. She lunged forward without hesitation, calling for Gukyeon's support as she began to unfold the subduing sword art of the Hansen clan. Hearing her call, Gukyeon stepped in to shield the leaders, unleashing the 10th Mastery Chi to reinforce their defense. Yet Arc Wui did not retreat. Instead, the energy hurled toward him was shockingly absorbed into his body, vanishing as though it had never existed. In the next instant, Arc Wui moved with a speed nearly invisible to the naked eye. Monk Sathi's sword shattered upon contact, her face twisted from the force as her teeth broke apart. She was thrown away violently, her body flung across the battlefield. Witnessing Monk Sathi being sent flying, Monk Gukyeon cried out, but even as the sound left him, Arc Wui had already appeared behind him like a shadow. A straight merciless strike followed. Arc Wui drove his fist into Gukyeon and immediately shifted to his next target. His movement was relentless. Jagal Youngin barely managed to evade the first blow, rolling aside, but Arc Wui launched a flying kick infused with force chi, sending him flying away like a pebble. Hong Palwu charged forward with a battle cry, unfolding the technique of the sleeping dragon in water, but the clash ended before it truly began. A sharp impact struck him, and before he could even comprehend what had happened, the pain of his organs being struck severed his consciousness entirely. The realization spread among the onlookers with crushing weight. The thought that the leaders had been defeated settled over them, heavy and undeniable. The clan heads and commanders, meant to form the formation, stood frozen in shock. All 7 lay collapsed on the ground, unmoving, showing no sign of regaining consciousness. Fear crept into their hesitation, yet Mekejong shouted, forcing action where paralysis threatened to take hold. He urged them not to waste time watching, reminding them that they numbered 5,000 and needed to act together. Deep within, Mekejong clung to a desperate belief, reasoning that overwhelming Arc Wui with sheer numbers would eventually exhaust him. At that moment, a deep surge of energy roared through the air. All eyes, including Mekejong's, turned toward it. They saw power gathering at the man's right fist, swelling to a magnitude that felt capable of bringing down the very mountain before them. Panic erupted. The realization struck that the man's target was the location where Mekejong and his forces were gathered. The commanders and clan heads, sensing the impending devastation, tried to shout for everyone to scatter, but their warnings never fully formed. Before a single command could be completed, the man's fist extended through the distorted space. The impact tore through the land. The ground split apart, trees were ripped from their roots, and a violent wind surged outward, overwhelming everything in its path. Cries of agony echoed as warriors were struck and swept away by the force, their bodies thrown helplessly through the chaos. There was no exception. A desperate urge to escape gripped them, the instinct to move rising within their minds. Yet it was already too late. The raging gust consumed even those who tried to flee. Mekejong himself, who had been on the verge of retreat, was caught in the storm, hurled away, and rendered unconscious. As the violent wind raged, warriors collided into one another, causing further destruction. When it finally subsided, nearly 1,000 people, along with the leaders, lay scattered across the battlefield. In the aftermath, a single thought dominated every mind. This was the power of the god of the East, Arc Wui. Arc Wui declared that if they did not wish to suffer further losses, they should gather their fallen and leave at once. Confusion spread among the survivors. They questioned whether he truly intended to let them go, uncertainty clashing with disbelief. His voice rang out again, commanding them with unmistakable authority to leave immediately. Yu Doji, leader of the White Rock Sword Clan, hurriedly stepped forward. Overwhelmed with urgency, he expressed gratitude for the mercy shown, offering thanks on behalf of the fallen masters and assuring that they would withdraw without delay. Without another glance, Arkwee turned his back and walked away. A command to hurry spread, followed by firm acknowledgement. Orders were relayed for each clan to retrieve their fallen, and the warriors responded in unison. Without delay, they rushed to gather their injured leaders and comrades. Once done, they reformed their lines, straightened their formation, and turned away from the battlefield. A clear command to retreat was given, and it was answered with a unified roar. Relief washed over them as they began to withdraw, each step carrying the weight of survival. They felt fortunate to still be alive, yet as they moved, an unsettling presence began to fill the air. Yu Doji glanced back, a sudden surge of murderous energy pressing against his senses. The god of the east was already gone, yet the entire forest beneath the mountain felt as though it had transformed into something demonic and alive. A vague fear rose within him, and he urged everyone forward with urgency. The warriors, sensing the same killing intent, quickened their pace without hesitation. Meanwhile, Arkwee had already entered the mountains when a voice emerged from within, its tone unfamiliar, its language unlike that of Jong-hu. The voice questioned him, accusing him of breaking his promise not to interfere with those who came. Arkwee responded calmly, stating that they had already left. The unseen man reacted with mocking amusement, interpreting Arkwee's actions as an attempt to save them. He questioned how long such efforts could continue, his words laced with ridicule. Arkwee reminded him firmly to uphold his oath. In response, the man twisted the very notion of an oath into mockery, laughing as he spoke with cruel intent. He recalled that only 6 days remained until 10 years would be fulfilled, urging Arkwee to anticipate that moment, promising his death at his own hands. As his words faded, the suffocating murderous intent that had spread in all directions gradually subsided. The hidden presence vanished, dissolving back into the shadows. A quiet sigh followed as Arkwee lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on the place where the presence had disappeared. Then, he too was gone. At the same time, atop a mountain peak roughly 2 miles from the entrance of Changbai Mountain, Hwang Heol stood with a subordinate of the Berserk Saber sect, both observing the distant scene. The subordinate reflected that even after more than 20 years, that monstrous figure still guarded the place. Hwang Heol, deep within his thoughts, recalled the Battle of Changbai Mountain from 2 decades prior when he had been a disciple of the Bladesword sect. That battle had delayed their grand plan by 20 years, and the memory of that day remained etched in his mind like a lingering nightmare. Breaking from his thoughts, he spoke of their relentless journey from the Patala Palace, pushing without rest to arrive before the demon god. Yet, despite their efforts, the Orthodox sects had reached first, bringing with them nearly 30 to 40% of their entire force. The sheer scale of such an army attempting to enter Changbai Mountain weighed heavily in his words. The subordinate considered the possibility that the Orthodox Murim Alliance was also seeking the essence core of the Wind-White Tiger. Hwang Heol acknowledged that the assumption was likely correct. The subordinate then reasoned that it would be wiser to wait for the Blade Master and report the situation, as their current numbers, only 200 sect members, were insufficient against such overwhelming forces, despite their individual strength. Hwang Heol responded with a faint smile. He agreed, yet saw an advantage in the situation. There would be no need for them to act directly. His intention had always been to provoke the monster of Changbai Mountain into vigilance, ensuring that it would inevitably clash with the demon god. The subordinate affirmed that provoking a clash between the two forces had always been their objective. He reasoned that if they fought, it would serve their purpose, and even if they did not, the one whose innate energy had been weakened would inevitably fall to the Blade Master, who would soon arrive. Hwang Heol, however, pointed out a lingering concern. The Orthodox faction remained largely unharmed despite facing the monster, making them an unpredictable variable. The subordinate questioned whether the Orthodox forces would remain in the area at all. Hwang Heol analyzed the possibilities with cold clarity. If their aim was the Essence Core, they would choose to withdraw, but if their intention was to interfere with the greater plan, they would attempt an ambush. He saw an opportunity within this uncertainty, reasoning that if he could entangle them in the conflict and eliminate all threats at once, he would be able to regain the Blade Master's lost trust. The subordinate then turned his thoughts toward a different question, wondering which of the two beings would emerge victorious if the god of the east and the demon god were to clash. Hwang Haeol fell into brief contemplation. After weighing the thought, he arrived at a single decisive conclusion, believing that the god of the east would be the one to prevail. 4 days had passed since the Orthodox faction failed to enter Changbai Mountain. Around 80 kilometers away, the Orthodox Murim Alliance established a camp in a field surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, waiting for their higher-ups to recover. By the 4th day, all the masters had regained consciousness and were able to focus on healing their internal injuries. However, Ho Hyunja, the leader of the Dayan Kang sect, succumbed to a fatal wound to the neck. Inside the barracks set up for temporary meetings, the gathered leaders sat under a heavy atmosphere, weighed down by the outcome of their defeat. With 5,000 warriors under their command, they had believed they could bring down the god of the East. Instead, the result had been disastrously one-sided. Though they had assembled for discussion, silence dominated the room with no one willing to speak. Monk Guk Yan was the first to break it. He expressed his confusion, reflecting on how, despite their losses 4 days prior, the god of the East had ultimately allowed them to leave with relatively minimal casualties. Yudoji shared the same unease, admitting that the situation troubled him as well. Hong Pa-woo questioned what he meant, prompting Yudoji to clarify his thoughts. To him, it had felt less like a battle meant to destroy them, and more like an effort to prevent them from entering the mountain. At that moment, Monk Sathi spoke as though recalling something. Before the battle began, she had noticed the god of the East observing the mountain carefully, as if he had been conscious of something beyond them. Master Peng, unable to contain his frustration, rejected the idea outright. He could not reconcile the notion that such a being, who had annihilated so many from the advance squad, had no intent to harm them. Monk Guk Yan considered the contradiction, questioning why someone merciless enough to wipe out the first team would spare the rest. He began to speculate that perhaps the one responsible for that massacre might have been... Mekajong abruptly cut in, urging them to reconsider how lightly they were treating the situation. His interruption drew immediate displeasure from Yun Young In, who questioned whether Mekajong, despite being recognized for his achievements and assuming Commander Kang's position, had the authority to intrude upon a discussion among leaders. Annoyed yet composed, Mekajong bowed and apologized for any offense, explaining that his intention was only to remind them that they were undervaluing the deaths of their men. Yun Young In reacted sharply, but Mekajong continued, emphasizing that while 40 casualties might seem insignificant compared to their total number, each of those lost was still a precious comrade and family member. Among them was even a master. He stressed that the fact they had been spared did not prove that the same entity had not also been responsible for eradicating the first group. A shift passed through the room. Yun Young-in, who had been on the verge of anger, fell silent, his expression tightening as he reconsidered Mekajong's words. Monk Guk Yan acknowledged the point, admitting that he had indeed treated their losses too lightly. Yun Young-in stated that they needed to consider the possibility of another threat, reasoning that the murderous intent they had felt during their retreat had clearly not originated from the god of the East. Master Peng erupted in fury, rejecting the notion outright. He insisted that no one other than the god of the East could have eradicated the first team. The first master, Mugu Chun, sharply countered him, pointing out that such certainty was questionable from someone who had been unconscious at the time. Master Peng reacted with outrage, taking the remark as an insult toward his injury. Mugu Chun cut through the rising tension, reminding everyone that time was limited. With both of their initial plans having failed, he declared that they would need to proceed with the final strategy devised by the general strategist. Monk Sathi supported the decision, emphasizing that continued arguments were meaningless. She outlined their immediate objective, to orchestrate a clash between either the demonic cult or the berserk saber and the god of the East, then intervene at the right moment. Their goal was not to face entire armies, but to have the god of the East engage the leaders of those forces, leaving the remaining enemies for them to handle. Muguchun, deep within his thoughts, reflected on the original intent behind the final plan. It had been designed under the assumption that the god of the East commanded his own forces within the mountain. However, witnessing his overwhelming strength, he concluded that the man alone was equivalent to an entire army, making it viable to proceed with the third plan. After careful consideration, Muguchun addressed Mekajong, stating that the plan plan hinged on the demonic cult leader arriving at Changbai Mountain. Without that, it could not proceed. He expressed hope that Mechajong's prediction would not prove incorrect. Mechajong responded with firm confidence, recalling that the demonic cult leader had already sought the dragon turtle's essence core in the northern sea despite possessing the fire Kirins. From this, he was certain the man would come to Changbai Mountain as well. He asserted that with proper preparation, they could secure the mythical creature's essence core and eliminate the demon god. At that moment, a voice suddenly cut through the air, remarking on how interesting the plan sounded. The room froze. Mechajong immediately looked around, trying to identify the speaker. None of those present had spoken, and confusion spread as everyone searched for the source. The question of who had spoken was voiced aloud. The answer came calmly. It was the speaker himself. The voice was familiar. In the next instant, the space at the barracks entrance trembled. From an empty point, an unidentified figure clad in black iron armor materialized. It was Chun Yo-won. A faint smirk formed on Yo-won's lips as he revealed that he had been searching for them, only to discover the scheme they had been plotting. He made it clear that those who laid their hands on what belonged to another would have to face the consequences. 7 days earlier, in Kaifeng, an academy branch had been opened within the capital. Huan Yi and Yin Moha had arrived there as part of the event. Due to the importance of the academy's presence in the capital, the 12th elder, Gu Chuyong, had been tasked with overseeing the opening under Chun Yo-won's orders. Upon seeing them, Gu Chuyong addressed both elders, questioning whether they had come under direct orders from the demon lord. Huan Yi responded with a soft, amused tone, indicating that their presence was not entirely due to orders, but partially his own decision. Gu Chuyong was taken aback by this, expressing concern. As the one in charge of the darkness sect, Huan Yi was not permitted to leave without explicit permission. Acting independently without the demon lord's directive was not something to be taken lightly. Before he could finish, Huan Yi reached into his sleeve and produced a piece of paper. With that, he clarified that his actions were not entirely of his own will. At the sight of the heavenly demon authority, shock rippled through the reception room. Every person present immediately dropped to one knee, acknowledging the order. Huan Yi revealed that it was an emergency directive personally given by the demon lord, prepared specifically for this moment. Gu Chuyong, startled, questioned whether the urgency was connected to the Orthodox Murim alliance. He recalled that letters had already been sent to the Northern Sea and the main base, assuming that the lack of response must be related. Huan Yi gave a brief acknowledgement. When Gu Chuyong pressed further, Yin Moha stepped in, noting that he seemed unaware of a critical development. She stated that Kaifeng had already been isolated. Confusion crossed Gu Chuyong's face as he struggled to grasp her meaning. Huan Yi then turned his attention toward Yuk Simyoung. With a formal tone, Simyoung introduced himself as the vice leader of the Darkness sect, offering his greetings to the sect leader. The revelation stunned Gu Chuyong, who reacted in disbelief at the mention of the Darkness sect. Simyoung apologized, explaining that he had been unable to reveal his identity earlier due to direct orders from the demon lord. Gu Chuyong let out an awkward, astonished response, still processing the situation. Huan Yi also offered an apology, explaining that this arrangement had been part of the true purpose behind the academy's opening. Simyoung had been sent to establish a base for the Darkness sect within Kaifeng. With that clarified, Huan Yi shifted the discussion forward, asking for a report and whether agents had been dispatched to the cult. Simyoung confirmed that he had already sent people and had even considered going personally. However, more than half of those he sent had gone silent within less than 5 days. Huan Yi immediately attributed this to Yu Ryu, the first general strategist of the Murim alliance. He noted that Yu Ryu had previously allowed their spies to operate in order to manipulate information. The sudden decision to eliminate them suggested that something significant was unfolding. Deep within, Huan Yi sensed the gravity of the situation. He recognized Yu Ryu as the most difficult opponent to deal with and found it troubling that his focus appeared to have shifted away from monitoring the berserk saber of the 6 martial arts sect's spies. Simyoung then revealed a crucial piece of information, stating that the Orthodox Murim alliance had mobilized their entire military force. The statement struck both Huan Yi and Yin Moha with shock. Huan Yi quickly processed the implication, concluding that the army must have been split into 2 directions, northeast and southeast. Yin Moha, overcome with anger, drew her sword. Her fury ignited at the realization that their spies had been eliminated as part of this movement. For Huan Yi, however, the scattered pieces began to form a larger picture. Deep in his thoughts, he observed that the forces guarding Zhonghu had neither shifted nor changed, likely a deliberate move to avoid drawing attention. Yet with their their intelligence network being disrupted and the full mobilization of their forces, the situation pointed towards something far greater unfolding beneath the surface. Huan Yi concluded that the Orthodox Murim Alliance was treating the situation as a matter of life and death. Gu Chuyang questioned whether this urgency was directed toward them. Huan Yi clarified that Kaifeng had been left untouched because their cult held the position of a national religion. Gu Chuyang reasoned that this must be why information had only been blocked rather than openly suppressed, though he doubted such measures could last long. Huan Yi explained that the reason was simple. They were acting in haste to accomplish something urgent. He inferred that the report from the Northern Sea must have been alarming, forcing Yu Ryu into a swift decision. He further speculated that the death of the Murim Alliance leader's second son might have contributed, especially given the fate of both sons. In any case, he believed the division of their forces into two directions was tied directly to the Alliance leader. Gu Chuyang suddenly realized the implication that even the letter he had sent to the Northern Sea might have been intercepted. Huan Yi reassured him, stating that this was precisely why they had come. With quiet confidence, he expressed his intent to demonstrate that such petty tactics would not succeed against him in a war of intelligence. A week later, as his plan unfolded, its effects rippled through the forces of the Murim Alliance. Shock spread among the leaders of the Orthodox faction as they questioned how such an intrusion had been possible. Footsteps echoed steadily as Chun Yo-won advanced. In response, the leaders of each clan instinctively drew their swords, shouting for him to stop. Mek Ajong stood frozen in disbelief. Deep within, his thoughts raced as he tried to comprehend the impossibility of the situation. Every line of intelligence toward the Northern Sea had been severed, and even the Blue Heaven Society had assisted in the effort. There should have been no way for Yo-won to locate them. Even a martial master had limits in concealing presence, and guards had been stationed everywhere. Yet Yo-won had appeared as if from nothing. The sheer impossibility of it led Mek Ajong to question what kind of sorcery allowed such a feat. Yo-won observed them calmly, evaluating the outcome of his test. He noted within himself that the feature he had most wanted to experiment with had proven effective. The transparency mode, unlocked after removing restrictions, allowed the user to become invisible. Though influenced by environmental factors, it was highly effective in remaining undetected when used skillfully. Yun Youngin protested, asserting that even as the leader of the cult, Yo-won's actions were excessively disrespectful. Master Peng watched in alarm, fully aware of the consequences of provoking the demon god. Yo-won responded with cold indifference, questioning who among them was truly being rude. In the next instant, his hand moved toward Yun Youngin's head. Though Youngin wished to raise his sword, his body refused to obey. The overwhelming force of true energy descended upon him, slamming him to the ground. A cry escaped him as the pressure crushed down relentlessly. Shocked, he attempted to resist, but the force only intensified, driving him further into the ground with each passing moment. The sheer weight of the power left him unable to comprehend its magnitude. Master Peng, overcome with fear, realized the terrifying disparity. Yun Youngin, who had already reached the entry level of the evolutionary realm, had been subdued with ease. He concluded deep within that Yo-won's power must have grown even further after obtaining the Dragon Turtle's essence core. The density of his true energy felt overwhelmingly lethal. Hong Pal-woo stepped forward, pleading for Yo-won to stop, reminding him that they were allies and warning that he was crossing a line. At those words, Yo-won lowered his hand. The crushing force vanished, and Yun Youngin was released, collapsing as he struggled to breathe, gasping for air. Relief flickered within Hong Pal-woo. He had believed there was no room for negotiation in the face of such overwhelming rage. Yet Yo-won's restraint suggested a sliver of hope remained. Yo-won acknowledged the statement, accepting that they were indeed allies. With that, he declared that he would first settle his personal matters. As Yo-won advanced, Mek Ajong, who stood closest to him, instinctively stepped back. Confusion spread among the warriors as they questioned what he meant by personal matters. In response, Yo-won casually waved his hand. The motion unleashed an overwhelming force, like a massive wave crashing into them, sending 6 of the warriors flying sideways before they slammed violently into the ground. Yo-won then demanded to know how they intended to repay the consequences of taking something that belonged to him. Mek Ajong gripped gripped by fear, tried to deny the accusation, but before he could finish, Yo-won cut him off. He revealed that he had already seen through him, recalling that Mekajong had only been at the peak realm before. Though he still appeared to be at that level, Yo-won questioned how he was managing the lightning chi flowing through his body. Shock struck Mekajong. Deep within, his thoughts spiraled as he realized his secret had been exposed. He had deliberately dispersed the internal energy from his dantian throughout his body to conceal his true state, something even the Alliance leader had failed to detect. Yet Yo-won had seen through it. He began to suspect that Yo-won's own experience with the Dragon Turtle's essence core allowed him to perceive such energy. The realization filled him with dread, knowing that even if he reversed the dispersion, he would not be a match. Uncertainty gripped him as he struggled to decide his next move. At that moment, a firm voice intervened, declaring that Yo-won had gone too far. Monk Guk-yeon and Muguchin stepped forward, placing themselves between the two. Muguchin introduced himself formally as the first master of the Alliance and the leader of the Shangxi Sword Sect, urging Yo-won to consider their alliance and resolve the matter through discussion. Yo-won responded with cold disdain, expressing his exhaustion at their repeated attempts to use the Alliance as a shield for their actions. With a single word, he ordered them to move. He extended his hand slightly as though parting space itself. In that instant, an invisible wall of energy formed, forcing both Guk-yeon and Muguchin backward. They struggled to speak, urging him to stop and to talk, but Yo-won dismissed them, acknowledging their strength even as he increased the pressure. A powerful surge of energy descended upon them, far stronger than before. Though they resisted with all their might, their efforts proved futile. Both leaders were pushed back helplessly, unable to withstand the overwhelming force. In that fleeting moment of distraction, Mekajong seized his chance. With a surge of lightning chi, his blade crackling with electric force, he launched an attack from behind Yo-won, aiming directly at him while he was engaged with the two leaders. Confidence surged within him as he believed Yo-won's lapse in attention would prove to be his mistake. Yo-won responded instantly. He blocked the strike with effortless precision. The lightning-wreathed sword vanished from its path the moment Yo-won caught it. Mekajong could not comprehend what had just occurred. Deep within, disbelief consumed him as he realized that Yo-won had caught the lightning-infused blade without using lightning chi, yet remained completely unaffected. Yo-won coldly remarked that such a display was pathetic, clarifying what true lightning chi was. At that instant, the energy within the blade, now gripped in Yo-won's hands, began to reverse its flow. The returning force was on an entirely different level. A violent surge erupted, and in the blink of an eye, a storm of lightning filled the entire barracks. Mekajong's body, still connected to the weapon, was engulfed in blinding light as the power coursed through him. A scream tore from him as he lost all sense of control. He could not even comprehend what was happening to his own body. His original plan had completely failed, and the thought of unleashing all of his lightning chi crossed his mind. Yet it was meaningless against someone who had absorbed the entire essence core. A desperate realization surfaced within him, fearing that if this continued, he would die. Yo-won observed him with a grin, noting that he was enduring better than expected, acknowledging that it was fitting for someone who had consumed the Dragon Turtle's blood. At that moment, several members of the Blue Heaven Society regained their senses and rushed forward to intervene. Driven by fear that Mekajong would be killed, they aimed to force Yo-won to release the blade. Without even turning his head, Yo-won casually lowered his left hand. An overwhelming force slammed down instantly. The three attackers were crushed face first into the ground, their bodies pinned as they cried out in pain, unable to move. From a distance, Monk Guk-yeon watched, unable to endure the situation any longer. Realizing Mekajong's life was in immediate danger, he moved to intervene. With resolve, he unleashed the 72 rites of the Shaolin Temple, directing a surge of golden energy toward Yo-won's right hand in an attempt to free the blade. Yo-won remained calm. He noted that he had shown restraint out of consideration for Guk-yeon's status as a monk of the Shaolin Temple. Then, with a slight motion of his left hand as if wielding an unseen sword, two invisible blades manifested and shot forward. They pierced through Guk-yeon's shoulders in an instant. A cry of pain escaped as blood spilled from the wounds, and Guk-yeon was thrown backward, unable to withstand the strike. Muguchin, witnessing the scene, was overcome with terror. Deep within, he realized that even someone of Gukyeon's stature appeared like a mere third-rate martial artist before Yowon. The overwhelming presence he felt was unmistakable. Yowon had reached the life and death realm. The sheer pressure reminded him of the first time he had faced the god of the East. The same suffocating dominance now stood before him once again. At that moment, Mekajong's body gave out. His burned hair released faint smoke as he collapsed onto his knees, his strength completely drained. Within, desperation surged as he clung to his ambition of creating a world of blue heaven, yet his body refused to respond, leaving him powerless. Yowon declared that he would restrain him for now and finish the matter properly. He raised his fingers and pointed directly toward Mekajong's dantian. For a brief moment, Mekajong panicked, trying to stop him. Before he could finish, a streak of light shot forth from Yowon's fingers, piercing straight through his dantian. An unbearable pain engulfed him, far beyond anything he had ever experienced. A scream of agony erupted as his core was destroyed. The energy within him spiraled out of control, running wild before dissipating entirely, leaving nothing behind. Yowon looked down at Mekajong, who lay wheezing and rolling across the ground, and remarked that there were still many intruders present, telling him to endure for a moment. As his hand extended, a chilling force spread through the barracks. Cold chi flooded the space, its intensity startling everyone present. The sudden emergence of such overwhelming yin energy left them shaken. On the ground, Mekajong's body began to freeze, and silence fell over the barracks. The leaders of the forces of justice stared in stunned disbelief, unable to comprehend how a single human could wield such a vast range of chi. The thought took hold among them that he was no different from the god of the East, a being beyond reason. Master Peng, gripped by fear, realized the full extent of Yowon's ruthlessness. Deep within, he understood that destroying Mekajong's dantian had already ensured his defeat, yet Yowon had gone further, sealing him in ice to eliminate any possibility of resistance. To him, this made Yowon even more dangerous than the god of the East. Unlike that immovable force bound to Changbai Mountain, Yowon moved freely. If he wished, he could shatter the balance between the three great forces entirely. Standing in the heart of the Morim Alliance's elite, Master Peng concluded within himself that it might be better to sacrifice their lives to eliminate him for the future of Jianghu. At the same time, Hong Palwu transmitted his thoughts to Muguchun, urging that they must somehow force the demonic cult leader into a battle with the god of the East. Muguchun rejected the idea internally, realizing that if such a plan had been viable, they would have already executed it. Moreover, Yowon had already overheard their earlier intentions. Stepping forward, Muguchun addressed Yowon. He acknowledged that Yowon had managed to infiltrate their camp, but questioned whether he truly believed he could stand against the elite forces gathered there. He clenched his fist, drawing upon his internal energy. As his power surged outward, the barracks trembled violently before bursting open in all directions. With the structure torn apart, countless warriors were revealed, already positioned with their weapons drawn. Shouts erupted as they recognized the demonic cult leader. Cries of alarm spread, and in an instant, the surrounding forces closed in. Muguchun raised his sword high, his voice carrying across the battlefield as he called upon the martial artists of the Orthodox Morim Alliance. He declared that the demonic cult leader had infiltrated their camp and demanded to know if they would simply stand by and allow him to act freely. A unified refusal thundered in response. At once, nearly 5,000 warriors moved as one. Sword-wielding fighters formed a tightening circle around Yowon, while archers took position, their bows drawn and aimed solely at him. Amidst the overwhelming encirclement, Yowon remained completely calm. He acknowledged their decision without a trace of concern. From the side, Monk Sati observed him closely. Despite standing alone against thousands, he showed no sign of fear. She recognized that such composure reflected the very resolve required to lead the demonic cult. Muguchun raised his sword and spoke plainly, expressing that he had no desire to fight. He revealed that their concern lay in Yowon obtaining yet another mythical creature's essence core, something he believed Yowon already understood. He emphasized that they were still allies and offered a choice. If Yowon abandoned his pursuit of the essence core, they would lower their weapons, but if he chose to fight, they would stake their lives against him. Before he could finish, something shifted. A sharp crack cut through the moment. Mugu-chun sensed the danger instantly and ducked. Behind him, screams erupted. Sword chi tore through the ranks, slicing into those caught off guard. Arms were severed, bodies split apart, and chaos spread in an instant. Seeing the carnage, Mugu-chun began to declare that they would sever the alliance and fight to the end. But before his words could finish, Yo-won appeared before him. In a single motion, Yo-won seized Mugu-chun by the neck. Everything unfolded too quickly to comprehend. Mugu-chun attempted to retaliate, driving his blade toward Yo-won's side, but Yo-won's response was faster. His grip tightened, and in the next instant, Mugu-chun's wrist shattered. The sword slipped from his grasp and fell to the ground. Yo-won's voice carried cold contempt as he dismissed their constant reliance on the alliance. With a surge of force, he gripped Mugu-chun's arm and tore it free from the shoulder in a single brutal motion. A torn scream forced its way out despite his throat being crushed in Yo-won's grip. Blood burst forth as the severed arm was ripped away. Shock froze everyone who witnessed it. Yo-won then cast Mugu-chun aside. His body flew through the air like a weightless object before crashing violently against the rocks. Hong Pao-woo cried out, desperately trying to stop the escalation. He reminded Yo-won that the berserk saber of the six martial arts sects still remained, urging that they should not turn on each other. Yo-won cut him off without hesitation. His voice turned cold as he exposed their hypocrisy, how they clung to the alliance only when it benefited them while scheming behind his back. He made it clear that he had no need for their help in dealing with the berserk saber. With finality, he declared the end of the alliance. The words struck like a shockwave. Every face stiffened as the reality of it settled in. Yo-won's expression darkened as he questioned how long they had expected him to tolerate their manipulative tactics. The moment his energy was released, lightning chi surged outward, crackling through the air. The elite warriors managed to remain standing, but those of lower levels felt an overwhelming pressure, as if their very breath was being crushed. Yo-won declared that they should already be prepared to face the consequences of attempting to kill him. Hong Pao-woo, flustered yet decisive, immediately issued urgent orders. He identified the threat and commanded everyone to destroy their weapons at once. His instructions spread rapidly through the ranks, and the warriors began smashing their own blades. Steel rang out as weapons shattered. The command escalated further, urging them to crush even the smallest fragments, leaving nothing behind. Deep within, Hong Pao-woo reasoned that without the threat of the heavenly flash, they could have relied on rotation tactics. They had prepared countermeasures specifically for Yo-won, and this was one of them. Yo-won responded with a scoff, acknowledging that they were at least capable of learning. Then the atmosphere shifted. A chilling cold spread across the battlefield, as though the entire area had been transported to the frozen expanse of the northern sea. The temperature dropped sharply, sending unease through the warriors. Before their eyes, the cold began to take form. The air itself condensed into countless blades of ice, each one gleaming with deadly precision. In mere moments, a vast array of ice swords hovered in the sky. The warriors of the Orthodox faction, who had just destroyed their weapons, were left stunned by the sight. Hong Pao-woo raised his voice, trying to steady their morale. He attempted to assert that controlling sword chi through such constructs should be impossible. But before the thought could settle, Yo-won challenged it, urging them to witness it for themselves. With a single motion of his hand, the suspended ice swords descended. They fell like a storm. The sky rained blades. None among the Orthodox Miram Alliance knew that Yo-won had mastered the cold ice heavenly art, an ability capable of forming ice as durable as hardened steel. Blue light flooded the battlefield as the entire camp became engulfed in the barrage. Screams erupted from every direction. Warriors cried out in agony as they were struck, while others desperately tried to evade the relentless storm. Those unable to react were cut down without resistance, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the attack. Hong Pao-woo, witnessing the devastation, realized the gravity of the situation. Deep within, he understood that this was no different from the battle at the castle of Jin. Now that the alliance had been shattered, Yo-won would show no restraint. Only a handful possessed the ability to block or evade such projectile chi. It was only a matter of time before complete annihilation followed. Yet within that despair, a single path remained. If Yo-won was killed, the massacre would end. Unlike before, there was no hesitation or distrust among them. This time, their objective was singular: Hong Pao-woo shouted with everything he had, commanding the warriors to strike. He urged them to aim for Yo-won's heart or sever his head, declaring that victory depended on eliminating him. With Yo-won controlling the storm of ice swords, he believed there was an opening. The warriors, however, stood frozen between fear and confusion. Unarmed, surrounded by a relentless rain of deadly chi, charging forward felt no different from embracing certain death. Monk Sathi observed that the situation had turned dire, realizing that everyone had frozen in place, their fear stripping away their will to fight. At that moment, a cry of agony rang out as Muguchun's voice thundered across the battlefield. Despite his pain, he drove his words into the hearts of the Orthodox Marine warriors, declaring that only those resolved to die would truly live, while those clinging to life would meet death. He urged them not to shrink from battle out of fear, but to confront the demonic cult leader with the resolve to sacrifice everything. Monk Sathi, alarmed, called out to him, knowing that Muguchun still needed time to recover. However, Muguchun dismissed the concern without hesitation as he picked up a broken sword. With sword chi erupting fiercely from his body, Muguchun declared that he would lead the charge for the orthodox path. In the next instant, he dashed forward, closing the distance to within 20 steps of Yo-won. A sharp sound cut through the air as Muguchun braced himself, steeling himself inside with the determination to endure. Drawing upon every ounce of his fighting spirit, he moved to intercept the incoming ice swords. Each clash rang out violently. He coughed up blood repeatedly under the overwhelming force carried within each ice sword, yet he refused to halt his advance, pressing forward despite the toll on his body. Cries rose from those watching, voices trembling as they called out to him. The same people who moments ago had been ready to flee now fixed their eyes on Muguchun. Though fully aware that death awaited him, Muguchun continued forward without hesitation, igniting a surge of courage in the hearts of everyone present. Cheers erupted around him, voices urging him onward and calling for the fall of the monstrous enemy before them. Deep within, Muguchun recognized that hope for the Orthodox Murim still remained. He resolved to become the one who would ignite that hope, believing that if his death could serve as an example, it would give everyone the courage to rise and join the battle. At that very moment, a sharp clang echoed as the sword in his hand shattered. Muguchun closed his eyes, acknowledging that his blade was gone, yet he had given everything he had. He questioned if this marked his end as 3 ice swords surged toward him. Then, in the next instant, the ice sword shattered. Muguchun's eyes flickered open as voices, now filled with determination, rang out with renewed resolve. They declared their will to fight together, rejecting the idea of letting him face the end alone and urging one another to survive through desperate struggle. Monk Sathi, Yun Young-in, and Commander O-meng had stepped forward. As Muguchun looked upon them, he smiled, even while continuing to block the incoming swords. Within his mind, he acknowledged the demonic cult's leader and recognized this as the true strength of the forces of justice. In moments of crisis, they stood united. With such unwavering resolve, if they fought together, even the demon god would not endure another day. Sword chi gathered once more around Muguchun's hand. Even without a blade, he resolved to continue fighting using the sword finger technique, holding firmly to the belief that what mattered most was never surrendering. Muguchun declared with unwavering resolve that even if his sacrifice alone would have been enough, he now called upon the warriors to advance together. To shield him, Monk Sathi, Yun Young-in, and Commander O-meng pressed forward, intercepting the incoming swords and carving a path through the relentless assault. Step by step, the distance narrowed. 10 steps remained. If they could close in just a few more, the gap would shrink enough to make a difference. It was the culmination of a shared dream. Deep within, Muguchun held firm to his purpose. He needed to stop the Heaven Flash. Only by doing so could he restore the shattered courage of the Orthodox Murim. His mission was clear: to save their faction and prove that even Yo-won and his overwhelming power could be brought down if they fought together. The count echoed silently within the minds of the warriors. Each number carried the weight of their hope. A unified cry rose, urging the fall of the demonic cult's leader. Even knowing the near impossibility of it, every warrior clung to the belief that it could still be done. At last, Muguchun took another step forward, reaching the critical distance. Through telepathic intent, he entrusted his final request to Hong Pao-woo, asking that his family be told of how he met his end. With a final surge of strength, he unleashed sword chi from his left hand and drove it forward, aiming for Yowon's neck. At that very instant, Yowon regarded the scene with cold disdain, dismissing it as nothing more than melodrama, noting that they themselves had initiated the conflict. He moved effortlessly. With a slight shift, he evaded the attack and seized Muguchin's wrist, crushing it in a single motion. A sharp crack resounded as Muguchin cried out in agony. It did not end there. An overwhelming surge of cold chi erupted, instantly freezing Muguchin's body. Unlike before, his head remained unfrozen, left exposed. Monk Sathi was thrown into confusion, unable to comprehend why Yowon had not ceased using the Heaven Flash. Before she could process further, Yowon had already appeared behind her like a shadow. Sensing his presence, she turned instantly and struck toward him with everything she had, her fury directed at the monstrous force before her. Yowon evaded with ease. In a single motion, he seized her wrist and pressed his hand against her chest, channeling his internal energy directly into her. The impact was devastating. Her Dantian, cultivated over decades of relentless training, collapsed instantly under his power. Even as the damage overwhelmed her, she clung to the thought that she could not fall yet. But it was futile. As her body gave way, Yowon froze her in place, leaving only her head unfrozen as blood spilled from her lips. Yun Youngin, shaken and disoriented, attempted to retreat from Yowon. Yowon's gaze locked onto him, his intent absolute as he refused to allow any escape. Before Yun Youngin could get far, a barrage of swords crashed down around him, forming an inescapable cage of steel. Trapped within it, he could only curse as Yowon closed the distance and struck, piercing him before freezing his body as well. In the end, the four masters who had stepped forward, prepared to sacrifice everything, were reduced to frozen statues, only their heads left exposed. Yowon grinned with clear delight, mocking them as he questioned whether their display was the extent of their melodrama. Amidst the chaos, the air swords continued their relentless assault. Cries of pain echoed as warriors were struck down one after another. Muguchin, still alive yet trapped within ice, was forced to watch his men fall before his eyes. Unable to endure it, Muguchin demanded to know if this was all meant to insult them, questioning whether it was acceptable to trample over the pride and sacrifices of those who had stood to fight. The weight of his despair drove him to wish for death instead. Yowon responded with a faint smile as he lowered his hand. In that instant, everything changed. The Heaven Flash came to a halt. The air swords ceased their movement, and the battlefield fell into an abrupt stillness. Those who had been running in terror stopped where they stood, confusion spreading across their faces as they struggled to comprehend what had just happened. A thought surfaced among them, that perhaps Yowon had exhausted his internal energy. Deep within, Hong Pao-woo immediately rejected that possibility, recalling that Yowon had sustained the Heaven Flash for more than 10 minutes at Jin Castle. There was no chance his power had run dry. At that moment, Muguchin spoke again, addressing Yowon with strained resolve. He admitted uncertainty about Yowon's intentions, but declared that no matter what he attempted, the line he had crossed could never be undone. Without even turning his head, Yowon waved his hand dismissively, cutting him off. Before Muguchin could finish, a sharp crack rang out as his jaw twisted grotesquely, leaving him unable to speak. Monk Sathi erupted in rage, condemning Yowon as a demonic martial artist and protesting the cruelty of attacking someone who could no longer resist. Yowon responded calmly, acknowledging their willingness to sacrifice themselves. He stated that he would not ignore such efforts and would grant them a chance. The warriors fell into confusion, unable to grasp the meaning behind his words. Raising his voice so that all could hear, Yowon addressed the martial artists of the Orthodox Merim Alliance, declaring that he did not believe they were united in a single will. At those words, the leaders stiffened. They understood that whatever followed would not end well. Muguchin attempted to intervene, but his mangled jaw rendered him incapable of doing so. Yowon continued, laying out his reasoning with cold clarity. He stated that their leaders had repeatedly attempted to kill him and his cult members despite being given multiple chances. He made it clear that he was not one to wear the mask of a monk, and that he and his followers had eliminated every individual who had tried to take their lives. However, he acknowledged that their leaders were now willing to sacrifice themselves. Because of that, he chose to make a single exception and offer a chance. He emphasized that while he did not tolerate future threats, threats, he also had no desire for unnecessary bloodshed and did not wish to massacre thousands. Murmurs spread among the warriors as confusion deepened. They questioned whether his words meant he was attempting to negotiate. A sense of urgency rose within Hong Palwu as he realized the danger in allowing such thoughts to take root. Firmly steadying himself, he spoke out, challenging Yo-won and asserting that they would not be easily divided by such tactics. Yo-won responded with a faint smirk, making it clear that he had no need to divide them. The chance he offered, he explained, was simple, one that required them only to reach a compromise and make a choice. Master Peng, filled with frustration, reflected internally that the demonic cult leader was acting like a coward, denying the obvious while attempting to trade the lives of the higher-ups for those of the remaining martial artists. He believed such a threat would only strengthen their unity. Pushing past his fear, Master Peng stepped forward and declared that those who saw through such foolish tactics would rather choose sacrifice. Yo-won immediately refuted him, stating that he was gravely mistaken. He laid out the choice with cold clarity. If the families of the higher-ups were exchanged for the lives of the ordinary martial artists, then everyone would be allowed to live. The moment those words settled, bewilderment spread across the battlefield. None could conceal their shock, and among the leaders it struck even deeper. Within his mind, Muguchun realized that Yo-won was weighing the value of their families' lives against those of the ordinary martial artists. Master Peng began to protest, rejecting the very idea of sacrificing family, but his voice faltered. He cut himself off as the awareness of the listening warriors weighed heavily on him. Yo-won, wearing a chilling grin, questioned whether this was not justified, implying that the sacrifice they had so strongly advocated should carry such weight. Monk Guk Yan fell into deep thought, recognizing that if Yo-won had demanded the lives of the higher-ups instead, they might have united and fought as one. However, in this situation, choosing to fight would mean accepting the deaths of others to protect their own families. Monk Sathi considered the situation carefully, recognizing Yo-won's terrifying cunning. Those from the temple had no families, but she understood that a single wrong response from the others could unravel everything. Hong Palwu assessed the growing tension, realizing that the alliance consisted of individuals who had chosen to stand there of their own will. They were not soldiers bound to blind obedience, and he could not demand that they give their lives for the sake of their leaders. As these thoughts spread, unease rippled through the warriors. Doubts surfaced within their minds, questioning whether their lives should be the price for someone else's family. The ideals of sacrifice for justice began to feel hollow, and accusations of hypocrisy stirred among them. Yo-won, observing the shift, reflected with quiet disdain that those who claimed to uphold justice were now choosing when it suited them. To him, it was a sign of corruption that inevitably took root in those who held power for too long, regardless of their allegiance. Setting aside those thoughts, Yo-won rose into the air. He concluded that they were incapable of reaching a decision, and that allowing them more time would be pointless. A blue hue began to form around the ice sword suspended in the air, ready to strike at any moment. Looking down at the shaken warriors, Yo-won declared that it seemed their leaders had already chosen the survival of their own families, urging the others to respect that decision. As he began to lower his hand, panic erupted. Voices cried out in desperation, questioning why they should be the ones to die for the sake of others' families. Others echoed the same fear, asking who would protect their own loved ones if they perished there. At the same time, opposing voices rose, urging their comrades not to fall for Yo-won's scheme. They warned that he was deliberately trying to incite internal conflict, and that giving in to doubt would mean playing directly into his hands. They insisted that unity was the only path forward, and that they must stand together to defeat him. The disagreement escalated rapidly. Some argued that they were not fools and understood the situation, but pointed out the harsh reality before them. While the higher-ups had delayed, preparing to sacrifice themselves for the orthodox path, it was the ordinary martial artists who had already been slaughtered by the Heaven Flash. Unable to speak, Muguchun could only process the unfolding chaos within his mind. He realized that the ordinary martial artists were being shaken to their core, and began to question whether this had been Yo-won's plan from the very beginning. At that moment, a voice rose from among the warriors, filled with anger and desperation. The man questioned what purpose their struggle had served, pointing out that they were unarmed and that even the masters were no match for Yo-won. He asserted that they had no means to stop the Heaven Flash and accused their leaders of pushing them toward death. His outcry was quickly joined by others. Voices surged with frustration, demanding to know why they were being forced into sacrifice. They challenged their leaders, arguing that if they were truly considered part of the alliance, then it should be the leaders' turn to bear the burden. More accusations followed, questioning whether only the families of the higher-ups held value. They pointed out that when considering all alliance members and their families, far more lives were at stake, and yet the leaders remained passive. Even those who had devoted their lives to the Orthodox Murim alliance could no longer suppress their disappointment. The dissatisfaction spread rapidly, growing louder with each passing moment. Some voices rose in anguish, rejecting the idea of sacrificing their families who had nothing to do with the conflict. Others condemned the leaders for shifting all responsibility onto them while never declaring their own willingness to die. Amid the escalating chaos, Monk Sati murmured with quiet despair, recognizing that such words should never have been spoken. But the unrest had already taken hold. Voices openly declared that they could no longer trust those who spoke of justice, stating that they would no longer sacrifice themselves for such leaders. Even members of respected factions, including those from the White Sword, expressed agreement with the growing sentiment, questioning how such sacrifices could be justified. As the situation spiraled, Monk Sati and Hong Palwu communicated through telepathic intent. Hong Palwu acknowledged that there was no way to regain control of the warriors. Though it was humiliating, he concluded that retreat was their only option. Monk Sati silently agreed, recognizing that Yowon had already secured victory. She held onto the belief that she might be spared and expressed hope that Hong Palwu would survive as well. At that critical moment, Monk Guk Yan stepped forward and raised his voice, calling out to the alliance members. He questioned why they were turning against one another, and speaking on behalf of the commander as the second master, issued a firm order for everyone to retreat immediately. Confusion rippled through the crowd at the command. Guk Yan reinforced his order, urging them not to make a choice and not to remain as targets of the Heaven Flash. He commanded them to run. As soon as the order was given, hesitation shattered. Some stood in shock, while others had already begun to flee. The first to move were the clan heads. A wave of realization spread among the rest as they questioned whether they were truly abandoning the battlefield. The act felt deeply shameful and humiliating, yet Master Peng, taking the lead in the retreat, cast aside such concerns. Within his mind, he concluded that humiliation and shame held no importance compared to survival. His sole focus became escaping the battlefield and protecting his family. Others quickly followed his lead, urging one another to move with the masters. Yowon observed their actions with detached clarity, noting that fleeing in a terrain surrounded by mountains on three sides was not a wise decision. Nonetheless, the retreat gained momentum. Leaders and warriors alike began to scatter, attempting to escape in different directions. Around 400 individuals moved in disarray, dividing themselves as they fled. The leaders, recognizing the opportunity within the chaos, seized the moment and carved out paths to escape. The fleeing warriors ground their teeth in bitterness, consumed by the humiliation they had just endured. Within their minds, they swore that one day they would repay this disgrace and settle the debt with the lord of the demonic cult. Then, without warning, Master Peng came to an abrupt halt. What lay ahead stunned him. Shock rippled through the fleeing group as they realized that their path had been completely cut off. Hundreds of demonic cult warriors stood in formation, sealing the only exit through the mountains. At the very front stood a man wearing a distinct mask, the Dark King, Markham. Beside him were the Six Swords and their forces, forming an impenetrable barrier. Master Peng's gaze trembled as it shifted across them, landing on a silver-haired man standing to the right, Dan Jushin, the commander of the North. Then his eyes moved again, settling on a sharp-eyed woman. Though she carried a fierce presence, he judged within his mind that she appeared weaker, someone he could overcome. With that thought, he made his decision. He surged forward and closed the distance in an instant, veering toward the woman, Yin Moha. Observing his reckless charge, Ko Wang-hul of the Six Swords smirked, recognizing it as a suicidal move. Master Peng struck, intending not to kill her outright but to defeat her and use the opening to escape. However, his attack was stopped effortlessly. Shock and disbelief erupted from him as he failed to comprehend how someone so young could counter him so easily. Yin Moha's expression hardened with fury. In the next instant, she moved, Her blade flashed and a single, clean strike passed through his neck. A short cry escaped him as his head separated from his body and fell, rolling across the ground. Stepping forward, Yinmoha placed her foot upon the severed head. With cold disdain, she reflected that she had lived far longer than him, dismissing his earlier judgment as nothing more than the whining of someone beneath her. Those who had followed Master Peng froze in horror. Cries erupted as they witnessed his death. Before they could react further, chaos broke out once again. From the right side, screams rang out as Dan Jushin unleashed his power. A freezing force swept through the escaping warriors, immobilizing them instantly. Their bodies succumbed to the cold chi before they could even attempt resistance. Dan Jushin declared with cold finality that despite their past ties, no one would leave this place alive. Elsewhere, Hosangwa advanced through the fleeing warriors, her battle axe cleaving through them without hesitation, cutting them down in brutal succession. Amid the carnage, one battered warrior came to a grim realization. Inside his mind, he understood that the demonic cult had been waiting at the only escape route from the beginning. Yoan had allowed them to run on purpose, guiding them straight into this trap. The path they had chosen had led them directly to their own graves. Accepting this truth, he could only cling to one final hope: that Yoan would honor the promise he had made. At that moment, a voice rose above the chaos. A man named Sung Jin-kyung stepped forward, declaring that they accepted the offer. Within his words lay a firm belief that Yoan would not break his promise. As Yoan raised his hand, a sharp sound cut through the air as a portion of the swords vanished. Relief flickered briefly among the warriors, but it was incomplete. The remaining ice sword still hovered in the air, unmoving yet threatening. Confusion gripped Sung Jin-kyung as he questioned why only part of the attack had been withdrawn. Yoan responded calmly, assuring him not to worry and stating that he would keep his promise. At that moment, demonic cult warriors moved across the battlefield carrying 5 large wooden boxes. They placed them before Yoan with precision. Hobum, who appeared to be in charge of the delivery, reported that they had brought everything as ordered. Yoan acknowledged the effort. The lids of the boxes were open, revealing countless small pills filling each one. A low stir of unease spread among the warriors as they stared at the contents. Observing their expressions, Yoan explained that each of them would take 1 pill, and afterward they would be allowed to leave. The meaning behind his words unsettled them further. One warrior, his voice trembling, questioned whether the pills were poison. Yoan gave a casual nod. Terror seized Sung Jin-kyung as he protested, reminding Yoan of his promise to let them live and questioning how this aligned with it. A cynical smile formed on Yoan's face as he answered. He pointed out that they wished to leave, and in his view, nothing had changed. He was still allowing them to leave. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.